There's something weird, and it don't look good. Who you gonna call? Live from various positions across the plane, easily determinable through ground-based tracking, are three men willing to question the status quo. Determined, fearless, and a little nutty. It's the GlobeBusters. Bob Xanadu 60, John the Morgile, and Jaron from Jaronism. The GlobeBusters.
And welcome everybody to GlobeBusters, Season 2, Episode 9, The Preponderance of Evidence Revealed. I am your host, Bob Xanadu 60, and today we are kind of going back to a retro show. We've got the three of us together again doing a show today. With me as usual, I have my host, Jaron, my co-host, Jaron from Jaronism. How you doing today, Jaron?
Fantastic. I love it. Kicking a little old school today, huh?
Yep, a little old school today, and we brought Morgile back with us to help us out today on a few things we want to get addressed, and so we got John the Morgile with us. How you doing, John?
I'm doing awesome, man. And isn't it sort of funny how everything is relative indeed? So, like, you know, I've been into this whole flat Earth thing for a year, and so technically, way back in the day was like 6 weeks ago. You know what I mean? Way back in the day was like 8 weeks ago. Was
remember when we used
way
to
back.
think we lived on a ball? You remember that?
God, doesn't that seem like an entire lifetime ago? Seriously.
Yeah, it really does. It's weird because you've done what, something like, I was looking at your static plane truth show, and you're like up to episode 12 or 13 or a ridiculously high number. I can't believe you've stuffed in so many episodes in the last couple months.
Yeah, I was sort of surprised too. I've actually started doing it twice a week, and I was sort of, and this is a confession. You know, the first time anyone's heard this, so might as well just do it live on the air, right? Whatever. But I was actually thinking about making yesterday the last show of season 1 at least, and we just had such a great show, such a great turnout, such a really awesome combination of panel members that I decided to extend season 1 another week. So I'll do it again on Wednesday and Saturday, but ultimately I am going to end season 1 and kick off season 2 on my primary channel where I've got, 14,000 subscribers, because right now I've got a 6-month copyright strike where I can't do live streams. So another 5 or 6 weeks of that, and then I'll do season 2 of Static Plain Truth on the Morgile, where hopefully it'll just get a little bit more exposure to my, very much beloved and cherished and awesome subscribers. So, but yeah, 12 or 13 episodes. I can't believe it either. It's like time flies on the flat Earth, I guess, is probably the new phrase, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was funny because, I got your notice and I was going to go on the show, and then you started the show, and like you were the only one there, and I'm like, oh God, I got to go up there and get on. And then right at just about that time, Cammie's mom showed up with her significant other, and they don't get over to see us very often, so I kind of felt obligated to kind of hang with the family.
I'll never forgive you.
I know. I felt bad too, but I was glad finally, Fran came on and Matrix and Kristen also. Kristen Wolf, she sounds like she's really got a lot of really good stuff. She's written me a couple times wanting to talk about Free Energy's model and her variation of it. So I think it should be really interesting to talk to about that.
Yeah, Kristen is smart as a whip. She's got some theories that I probably would do injustice to try to explain, but she makes a lot of good points. She does have a little bit of I wouldn't say trouble communicating, but she's wanting to learn the video making process a little bit better. And actually, I kind of told her a few months ago that I would sort of help her at least with the basics, because it certainly does help to have someone just show you around the software a little bit, as opposed to just almost doing like video training manuals or something. So, but yeah, she's smart as a whip. She's got a lot to say, and I think that we'll see some videos from her eventually. You know, just because, again, she does have a lot to say. She's got some good ideas. I don't necessarily agree with her on every aspect of her ideas and theories, but hey, I mean, you know, I think we can probably say the same thing about most flat earthers. And of course, I mean, we have plenty of common ground. I mean, we all agree the Earth isn't a sphere and it's not spinning. And to me, you know, the exact model or the exact map is almost, I mean, I wouldn't say irrelevant, but it certainly is secondary to the fundamental, you know, empirical evidence that involves, you know, lack of curvature, lack of axial rotation, just to start with the two most basic things, right?
Yeah, yeah. You know, we're really going to have to talk to her because, you know, by her having different opinions than us and everybody else, that doesn't fit well into the cult model here. So, you know, I don't know what we're going to do about her. But,
oh,
you know.
yeah, well, that, you actually, see, what I did is I chain her in my basement, even though I don't have a basement, I live in a trailer. But I chain her in my basement, I gag her, and then, like, it's sort of like Stephen Hawking, like, I know, I'm kidding. No, she...
You mean she lives 50 years longer than she should?
What's that?
Said she lives 50 years longer than she should?
Right, yeah, exactly. I saw a, did you guys see Stephen Hawking's reaction? It's totally changing the subject, but did you guys see Stephen Hawking's reaction to the binary black hole instance where they became a singularity black hole? The little LIGO thing?
Yes, the LIGO thing that we covered.
Yeah.
No, I didn't see his reaction. How did he react?
Did he have a reaction?
Oh, well, I mean, his reaction was a blank stare. Like, if he could blink his eyes, he would be signaling in Morse code, "Get me out of here! Help me, please save me from these crazy people." That's what he looks like. But what's coming out of that little box is, "I think it's beautiful that we finally," something along the lines of, "we've finally discovered gravitational waves, just like Einstein predicted. All of Einstein's predictions are always right." I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but you know, I don't know. I just don't believe a computer output that the guy looks like and no offense to him, I just don't think that any of that is originating from his thought processes. It could very easily be just typed into, God, even like an old Amiga from the 1980s, right? And get the same sort of effect that we've got with the whole Stephen Hawking narrative. But yeah, he did a response to the LIGO, red flag, LIGO interferometer reading of the so-called gravity waves, which were actually just a blip on a chart that were complemented by some very spectacular CGI that, yeah, we indeed covered, which I think the whole thing was a big, fat, ridiculous waste of time. And, you know, astrophysicists stroking their egos with very beautiful CGI based on conjecture and a blip on a chart.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? He, well, obviously, when we covered that on a show a few months back, right after they made the first announcement about it, it was so obvious, you know, what it wasn't and actually what it was, you know, as far as the magnetic dipole, and they're just kind of swirling it together. So I'm sure that Stephen Hawking, you know, assuming that he is the great physicist that they say he is, was looking at going, "What's wrong with you people? This is just a magnetic dipole, you know, swinging around each other, and you've cleverly made it converge into one pole, and then you call that a gravity wave." It's just ridiculous.
I get the feeling that, like, if he could utter a word, he would say, "That box is lying. That's not what I said."
I know, and that voice is, I mean, it sounds like that voice comes from an Amiga computer. I mean, it's so old. Do you think that they would use, yeah, something a little bit better than that, right?
Well, from what I gather, I did research it a little bit. They decided to keep it for nostalgia purposes because that's sort of his known voice. And it's like, you know, the whole Michael Jackson thing, right? Everybody knew him as the young little hee, the little kid with the high-pitched, you know, what is it, soprano or whatever? I don't know. The high-pitched voice. And then when he went through his, well, you know, his formative pubescent years, he sort of got very upset because his voice started getting deeper and such. And so I guess it's sort of the same thing with Stephen Hawking, whereas if he came out with the new, "Hey, darling, you look marvelous," computer voice, that it wouldn't be the same, right?
Yeah, yep, that is so true. Anyway, okay, so to kind of get onto the points today, as you know, I titled the show "The Preponderance of Evidence Revealed." And so what I wanted to do, and I don't know if you guys have seen John LeBon's new video again this morning. He seems to really take pleasure in making note of everything that we say and then making a video about it. And in this case, his entire video is nothing more than excerpts from our show with Max Egan. Where I'm trying to explain to Max, how we go about doing things with the preponderance of evidence. And of course, Max's standard reply is, well, it's just a circular argument. And I had to laugh, honestly, because John LeBon put up this little counter about how many times I said preponderance of evidence, or we did, collectively, versus how many times Max Egan said it's a circular argument. And of course, he won out, hands down. I think it was something like 24-18 or something like that.
Okay.
But I couldn't believe it. I'm just sitting there listening to it, going, really? You made a video out of this? And what exactly is your point? So I guess what he's asking for, and not that I'm catering to his wishes whatsoever, but because it was kind of going right along with my line of thought for today's show, is to actually come out and discuss those things that we consider to be major elements in the preponderance of evidence. And of course, those things would include not only the direct proofs for flat Earth that we hang on to. Me personally, I love the horizon rising to eye level and stuff like that, but also the direct proofs against the ball Earth and the incongruencies that are there. And I started thinking of them, and there's so many of them. It's absolutely insane. And one of the things that I was kind of going to start out with, or at least we can kind of interlace this in between the discussion here, is Dave Murphy's, allegedly Dave's video, An Open Letter to Neil deGrasse Tyson Regarding Flat Earth, at which point he puts out some very, very excellent questions. And I think that a lot of those fit right into our preponderance of evidence for the flat Earth and against the ball Earth. And I think it's mostly important to say that a lot of people have found problems with the globe Earth, not just the flat Earthers. Obviously, Stephen Christ and his concave model have problems with it. There are other schools of thought. Free energy, of course, with his repeating space, has problems with it, and all of these are kind of variations on a theme, so to speak. But regardless of the fact of our disagreements on the different models that we have, we all seem to be in pretty much stark agreement against the problems with the globe Earth. And one of the things that I know on your show, you've got Brian that has been discussing the eclipses and the problems with that, and how he's come up with the $5,000 NASA challenge. Yep. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that, because that's one thing we can kind of kick off with. That there are flat earthers out there that are not only verbalizing the problems that they have, but in Brian's case and the guy that he's working with, they're kind of putting their money where their mouth is and putting $5,000 up on this challenge. And so far to date, I have not seen any significant feedback on the website where anybody's taking that challenge or has even attempted to take that challenge, which to me is pretty puzzling.
Yeah, definitely, and I'll definitely answer that question. Just to cover a couple things that were mentioned real quickly. I don't know if you guys caught this, but I actually, and this actually happened a few months ago, but I debated, I guess you could say, Red's Rhetoric's crew, or fanboys, or whatever, but Tim Osman, I think he's also known as Cognitive Dissonance, and then two other dudes, Upside Down Head Ted or Ed, and another guy. Anyway, something that you had mentioned, though, is that yes, we can provide proof for a flat Earth, and yes, we can provide evidence that the Earth is flat and stationary, but a big part of this argument, a very important part of this argument, is to show how the heliocentric model doesn't work. In other words, to falsify the heliocentric model with either experimentation or just common sense or whatever. But these very adamant globe earthers, such as Tim Osman and others like Red's Rhetoric, they simply will not allow you, or they will just like plug their ears and close their eyes and sing la 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 if you try to show them any sort of evidence that falsifies their belief system. And so that is a big challenge, but I'm sorry to say to the Globers, this is a two-way street. I mean, we can bring any sort of evidence we want into a scientific discussion, and if the evidence that we're talking about actually disagrees with or even falsifies doctrines or assumptions in the heliocentric model, then the burden of proof is now on the globe Earth proponents, no longer on us. So I just wanted to sort of make that point, because Jaron, you did sort of mention that a bit. As far as the football, John LeBon, like sort of keeping stats in terms of what was said, I was always amazed. Like if you watch football, as soon as a play is made, the announcers will tell you, well, that was the 5th time this season that Jerry Rice farted within the 20-yard line and caught the pass with his left hand, and it's his 7th 14-yard catch this season, and they have all of these stats like that they can instantly pull up, which obviously, it's a bunch of people's full-time job to make note of all of these, interceptions and receptions and sacks and whatnot, so that whenever something's entered, they get instant, stats as to what's happened. But I mean, are we really approaching that level of, I guess you could say esteem, where people literally are counting our words and our stats and like how many times we mention something and then using that as, I don't know what. I mean, it's sort of interesting with football, because it is nice to know how many times Jerry Rice farted within the 20-yard line while catching a pass with his left hand. But at the same time, I mean, really? But anyway, I got a lot of love for John LeBon, because, he was coming out with this whole flat Earth thing and doing some good interviews way back in the day, like, not 9 months ago, right? A year ago. And finally, that was just sort of in jest. Love John LeBon anyway, but that is kind of bizarre.
Yeah. So Brian, just before you go on that, just out of curiosity, what is it that you think John LeBon is trying to accomplish? I mean, I realize that he did the Baller Skeptic show, Roundtable, with Ben and David, all last year, and I remember, absolutely loving those episodes, and I think most of you guys, I know Jaron was on it, I'm not sure if you were or not, but yeah. Anyway, a lot of people, you were on it, a lot of people were on it, and, granted, he never said that he was a flat earther, and I can appreciate that, but it just seems to me that when you are so absolutely convinced that it's not a globe, and you've got all these proofs, and you've talked for weeks with all these people, kind of mounting up these proofs against it, then you would be kind of left with a very limited choice of what topology you think the Earth is. And, that would be, either the concave Earth, the hollow Earth, or basically the flat Earth, or in free energy's case, the flat Earth that's modified with the looping space. But the bottom line is that, all of these, with the exception of concave, still describe a flat Earth kind of topology. And, from what we've seen with the experiments that we've done, all the visual evidence that we have seen from, standing at a shoreline, to looking outside my balcony in Hawaii and seeing the horizon rise up to exactly the same level as the next building over, which was right at eye level. All these different things, to me, and also being able to not measure any curvature, not be able to measure it, not be able to see it. We've talked to land surveyors that basically are saying, no, this is all done off planar model, and the geodesy is a mathematical construct. I think we've made that fairly clear, because we've yet still to see to this day any large structures that even take geodesy into account. Now, they have come up with some ridiculous examples by saying, like, the San Francisco Bridge was actually, they tilted them back, I think, like an inch on each side on the big trusses, to accommodate for the curvature of the Earth, which is just silly when you think about it. But, so they said that, whatever. But again, that would be still too small of a model for them to even be doing that, according to their own words. So when I watch John LeBon do this, and and he comes in and basically tries to argue with, the flat earthers, well, what is your proof? You can't really prove this or you can't really prove that. It's like, okay, well, actually, we can prove a lot of it, but you have to wonder about somebody that is calling shenanigans on our model, and potentially everybody else's. So what exactly do you think he's doing? Is he just being there to be the devil's advocate, or just to piss people off? I'm not exactly sure.
It frustrates me though, because it's like the easy road. He took the easy road. You basically can go out on a limb like we're doing, or you can take the really simple road, which is or to go against it and be a globe Earth believer and to say you believe what science says, like real tough, wow, you're real impressive. But he went the middle road by just saying, well, I know it's not a globe, and I'm going to play the middle road. To me, it just seems like a cop-out, because it'd be real easy if we started the show next week, Bob, and we just said, let's make fun of flat earthers and demand proof, and count how many times they say preponderance of evidence, and look at all their videos and say you're not showing any proof, and then at the same time do that with the globe people. I mean, it'd be a very easy position to take.
Yeah, absolutely, it would be, and it just seems like he's being very non-committal. And of course, he would tell you, "Well, I'm purposely being that way," but it seems like you're trying to play all sides of the fence, and in doing so, you're really not gaining any allies either way. I mean, you're against the globe, you're against the flat Earth, you're against concave. It's like, well, what exactly do you believe? And of course, that's the one thing that he seems to withhold. What exactly is it that he envisions the topography of the Earth to be? So I don't know. I mean, he puzzles me, to say the least.
Well, one thing, and I'll sort of respond to both of those, and then also to the challenge thing. But what you had originally said in terms of if there's no curvature, and we can prove that, and the world isn't spinning, then what are we left with? So if we can debunk curvature scientifically with observation, experiment, and predictions, and repeatable observation, experiment, and predictions, and do the same thing with axial rotation, because there is none, then what are we left with? I mean, do we entertain the idea of a banana-shaped Earth, or do we go with basic observation? And one thing I wanted to mention that's funny. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the classic old movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I've got it up as sort of like my the backdrop on the wall of all my social media pages, just because, well, first of all, it was like my favorite movie growing up, even as like far back as I can remember. I must have watched that movie a million times, but if you watch it again as a flat earther, there are actually a lot of references, not really that much out in the open, but just slightly behind the veil. Like if you actually pay attention to the whole movie, there are all sorts of references to possibly what you could say are flat Earth references, and one of the funny things that the very scientific knight says, the guy that was weighing the witch in the beginning, is he postulates they're walking on their way to Camelot, that he's telling King Arthur that the world is banana shaped. So it's funny because that's sort of what they were postulating back in the pendulum experiments, because the results that they were getting from the pendulum experiments were so inconclusive that scientists believed that the world was like this odd, very peculiar oblong spheroid, and even things like banana shaped. So Monty Python and the Holy Grail is definitely one of those movies that you want to watch as a flat earther. Same thing with Back to the Future. But one thing in terms of John LeBon, and again, I do have a lot of respect for him because he was talking about this topic when it was extremely taboo. I think he was amongst the first to have, like, I guess you could call it the big guys, Dubé and Sargent, and I don't know if you ever had Matt Boylan. I know Boylan was very shied away from any sort of public exposure or interviews for a very long time, which is a little bit odd considering he's a very open actor and such. But besides the point, where I think John LeBon's coming from, and I do tend to agree with him, is that the phrase proof of a flat earth, so quotes, proof of a flat earth, I think that phrase is being thrown around pretty wildly. And of course, sometimes it's used properly, I think, But other times, this whole idea of proof of a flat Earth is used, um, contrary to the idea of what proof is. There is, of course, circumstantial evidence, there is subjective evidence, and then, like, Bob always says, and I agree, then you have empirical evidence, which is basically, observable, repeatable experiments that make sense to just about anybody who can do the experiment. And when you start adding up all of these different things, it's not just one thing or another. When you have all these different points of reference that are all pointing towards one thing, one very simple truth, and then we're coming back to Occam's razor here. I totally agree with Bob that the empirical preponderance of evidence is just so ridiculous, but we're not, and I hate to use the words friends and enemies, but our enemies in this analogy would be the globe earthers, who are just willfully ignorant. But really the only weapon they have going for them is this sort of willful ignorance. And so in John LeBon's sort of half defense, I would say that I think we should be more careful about what we call proof of a flat Earth or disproof of a globe. And just one example, and I'll pass the stick, but like Columbus's observations of the massive ships going over the curve of the Earth before the hole or after the hole, right? So we all know the analogy, but that being restored by a telescope, to me, is not proof of a flat Earth, but it is disproof, or it is a big problem for that assumption and observation of Columbus. And so again, I just think that we tend to use the word proof a little bit too loosely sometimes, and I'm guilty of it too. But when you have just so much evidence, just so much physical evidence that's repeatable and just makes so much sense, it gets to the point to where entertaining heliocentric theorem just becomes such a waste of time, because it's so preposterous, and yet we must do it because 99% of the world believes that that's what's going on. And so it's almost as if we sort of have to know the heliocentric model better than they do, and really beat them at their own game.
I just look at it as, if you look at the other side and look what's being said, look at the comments of what is proof of a spherical Earth. Like I told you earlier, somebody said because the live feed from the ISS cuts in and out over time, that is proof that the Earth is a ball, because it proves that they have to cut out because they're on the other side of the Earth. That's somebody's proof that the Earth is a ball. Or they'll say that
right.
The proof of the ISS being legit is that you can go outside and look up in the sky and see it. How do people not understand what proof means? That's not proof of anything. It's proof that something's going by up in the sky. But these are the kind of things that you just see people proof. Every little bit that they find, they want to call as a proof. So I think a lot of it sometimes is just kind of showing them by giving them back what they're throwing at us. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, and and of course you've got like pulling a Tyson, and again I'm gonna continue with that until pulling a Tyson is modified from biting a man's ear off to dropping a microphone to prove gravity. But pulling a Tyson is essentially a demonstration of what goes up must come down, and for them to call that proof, yeah, it's the same exact thing is rife in the globe model. They call all sorts of things proof of a spinning sphere, when in fact it's again it's just conjecture, or even just an observation that leads to a theory. But you can't take that observation to prove the theory that it led to. That's just ridiculous. You follow me?
Yeah.
Dropping your pen, it falls to the ground. That is definitely an awesome demonstration of what goes up must come down. But in terms of proof of an Einsteinian sense of gravity, it's just ridiculous for people to, theoretical physicists as profoundly esteemed as Neil deGrasse Tyson are going to use that. It just makes them.
Is that proof that ignorant. The moon is falling? That the moon is always falling around the Earth and just missing the edge of it? Is that proof because you can drop a pen? It doesn't prove anything.
Yeah, exactly. And let's also not forget that this debate has been going on for 500 years, and every scientific experiment that has been done basically has shown without question that the Earth is not in motion. Going back to the Michelson-Morley experiment and the Michelson-Gale experiment and the Aries failure and it said yada, yada, yada. I mean, all of these experiments are still standing and valid today. Okay, so, people will go into arguments and saying, well, Jaron makes this argument that we don't feel like we're spinning around at 1,040 miles an hour, and we don't feel like we're also going 67,000 miles an hour around the sun, and God knows what speed around the Milky Way, and on and on and on with all these yeah, and all these vectoring, and they say, well, you can't feel it, because you're essentially going one direction, and the human body can't feel that. But the problem is maybe the human body can feel it, maybe it can't. You can make that argument all day long, and you could kind of go either way on it. But what is incontrovertible is that we certainly have the instrumentation that would measure and be able to detect the motion of the Earth, especially here we are in the 21st century. And guess what? It doesn't exist. There is nothing that shows any real-time measurement of the Earth in motion, save you want to look at the pendulum experiment, Foucault's pendulum, which is just nonsense and is completely non sequitur. It proves nothing. It changes direction periodically. There are, the gyros, which have been around forever, that prove that we are not changing orientation. When you put them in an airplane, people say, oh, well, your argument of a plane flying off into space is nonsense because your instrumentation would correct that. It's like, no, the instrumentation is not doing anything to correct anything. It is simply making measurements. And when you have a gyroscope that is attached and performing the function of your artificial horizon in an aircraft, and you are on a big airliner and you're flying from Denver to Hawaii or whatever, where you should have 700-800 miles of curvature, guess what? That gyro is not picking up any change in orientation. And at 700 miles, that jet airliner essentially is going to have to be totally nose down from where it was when it took off in Denver, because it's, going around the corner of the Earth. Go ahead, Jaron.
What people don't get either is that once you've given permission for them to say that you don't feel the movement of the Earth, then just understand that you would believe anything they said. We could be going 8 gazillion miles an hour, and how would you argue them? Since you can't feel it, what difference does it make what speed they say? If you're just going to accept what they say, that you can spin no matter how fast you spin, you'll never know. That means the Earth could be spinning 87 gazillion miles per hour spinning, and we would all just have to say, yeah, we must be because they say so.
Well, what's so funny about that to me, though, is their whole argument is based on angular momentum. And you guys, and Bob, you probably know a little bit better about the physics of this than I, but I've thought this through, and I've done some very basic experiments that involve, really inertia. But maintaining angular momentum is something completely different than maintaining a rotational frame of reference. And so just, using the equator as a fixed point that you're going to stand at, and I've done the math on this, it might be slightly off, plus or minus, but it's about right. If you're standing at the equator, you should be technically zipping eastward at 1,037.5 miles an hour. So let's give them that and say, okay, you wouldn't notice that because your feet are stuck to the ground and everything's going with you, so that's 0. But on top of that angular momentum, you're also zipping down, basically vertically, according to you, an inverse square curve, a parabolic curve, which goes right into the curvature calculations, which is roughly 8 inches per mile squared. And if you do the math over an hour, you'd be dropping about 136 miles an hour. Okay, and so that would be, I looked it up, just that droppage would be the second fastest roller coaster in the world. The first one is at Ferrari Land. It's like 145. So it would be like a very exciting roller coaster all the time. And keep in mind that, while you're supposedly dropping, it's like 700,000 feet per hour, about, I think it was 136 miles an hour. That entire time you're zipping around that curve, your phase in inertia in comparison to the Earth is going to change. And what I mean, like say it's twilight at 6 a.m., say the Earth is racing up towards your feet at 66,000 miles an hour, and you're zipping along that curve, and you're falling at 136 miles an hour. But then 12 hours later, the Earth is racing down away from your feet in the opposite direction, and in the 12 hours in between, you would have been in an inertial phase in between those two extremes, an opposite velocity of 132,000 miles an hour, according to the supposed orbit of the Earth. And that's not even getting into this wild roller coaster ride involving the spin, and not even factoring in the galactic frame of reference as the ultimate roller coaster ride. I mean, and the whole thing just becomes more and more ridiculous as you get further and further into the heliocentric model, which is, it's just preposterous. But we talk about the ancient Greeks and Copernicus and Newton and all these guys coming up with this sort of hypothetically plausible heliocentric model, but we have to understand that most of these guys, and I've touched on this point a little bit, but it is really important. Most of these guys were totally ignorant to the concept of things like manned flight. Such a thing was laughed at. Flight was for the birds. They would have laughed you out of the room if you had suggested something like manned flight. Electromagnetism was, they would have probably called you a witch and burned you at the stake if you would have come up with something to do with electromagnetism and demonstrated it. So, these highly esteemed godfathers of physics in the heliocentric model were literally ancient idiots who were completely incapable of describing something like, electromagnetism or manned flight or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, for some reason, hundreds of years later, we still adhere to their very clever and astute, yet half-witted, half-baked postulations as fact, when indeed, the entire model of our universe was essentially theorized in this ancient history, when even the brightest of mankind lacked the capability to understand or even describe what is actually happening in reality beyond the visible, audible, ground-based spectrum. And I would argue, even to this day, we're not fully capable of describing or being aware of everything that's going on out there.
No, absolutely not. And additionally, going back to the point that you were making earlier about going back to the ancient Greeks, and this is one of the points in allegedly Dave's letter to Neil deGrasse Tyson, where he says in 240 BC, Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference from the difference in shadow length of two sticks placed a known distance apart. Okay, and that's all great, except then he goes on to talk about how science's debunking of crepuscular waves would indicate, and the reason for that is because the atmosphere is actually refracting the light that's coming from the sun. Well, then you have to go back and say, okay, well, if the atmosphere is refracting the light from the sun, then how is it possible that Eratosthenes' sun curvature lights could shadows from his sticks that he put in the ground could have possibly been right.
Right.
If they've been refracted by the atmosphere, that completely invalidates the entire. So he's saying, okay, so which is it? Is it that the crepuscular rays are actually correct and the sun is very close, or Eratosthenes was doing his experiment, through sunlight that was refracted through the atmosphere with the sun at a distance of 93 million miles. Either way, the result would be incongruent with the latter, the form that you're comparing it to. So again, this is right up there with the same argument of how he was covering earlier.
They just pick and choose what they want to use.
Yeah, but no, that really is a perfect, like, almost checkmate move, and I really love allegedly known as Dave. He does some awesome work, and that's really, that's just an example of that really checkmate, like where you're going to go with that. But go ahead, continue. I just didn't want to interrupt, but yeah, awesome.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, and then the other thing is he talks about how we are seeing. Let me go back to this right back here. Here we go. So first they say, well, the ships disappear over the horizon bottom first, and this is evidence of curvature, and that horizon line would be about 5 miles, right? Now we all know that's nonsense because contrary to some anti-flat Earth beliefs. We know that we can zoom back in and see the ship that is quote unquote gone over the horizon in its entirety. Now that we have some of this new equipment like my P900, my Nikon, or other cameras that have high zooms on them. But so if we're looking out, like he's showing here, and that ship disappears over the horizon at 5 miles, and we can see 5 miles to either side. Again, why is it that we see no curve there? So why is it that we, at 5 miles, we can see a ship go down over the curvature of the Earth, and yet we can look 10 miles across, just like he's showing here, again, and see no curvature? And this is only from eye level. I mean, when you go up higher and higher and higher, again, the evidence shows that the horizon remains absolutely flat. And I've got another really good graphic that I'll bring up here for that in just a minute.
And that little boat you just showed going over, how it shows the times. What times did it show? Because didn't it show it shows a huge amount of time that passes, which if that's a 3 mile point where the horizon is, then how fast is the boat going? Basically, if you're showing us a time for an hour or 2 hours, well, is the boat going 3 miles an hour?
It appeared to me they're adjusting the camera, and you've got some sort of tidal action going on as well.
Look at the water. You can see the water rise up throughout.
It was clearly fake. I mean, this was something that, they used the camera angles and probably got the camera much closer to the water to where it gives you this kind of perspective of it's rising up. Because remember, everything is kind of going like if you're looking down the end of a pyramid, all of your perspective is going to be going towards a point. This has been demonstrated a million times over, and I would hope we would not have to demonstrate that again. But clearly that's the case here. They're getting down closer to the water, and kind of being very dishonest about this. And I think anybody that's ever done this experiment themselves, like Lori Frary's red boat thing, you can see very clearly that this is not what's happening at all. Another person that caught a lot of flack for it was a fakeologist, where he was shooting across whatever it was in Canada, and then showing was it Vancouver on the other side, I believe. Toronto. I'm sorry, that's right, Toronto.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw that one too. Yeah, that was well done.
Yeah. So, and again, we are dealing with some definite, visual aberrations that do have to do with heat rising off the water, but it is not unequivocally, bending over to where we're seeing entire city skylines, coming up completely undistorted. I mean, that's just nonsense. I mean, when you're dealing with a mirage, it's different.
If you look at this picture right here that you have up, and you remember that all that water is below this person's feet, then if it was a globe, it would go out from your feet and fall away. It would not come up to your eye level. There's no reason for it to do that. Basically, this picture would show, if it was a globe, that where you stand, the land goes up away from you and then drops, as if you're standing on a hump. Not at the top. They tell us we're all at the top of the ball. Well, that's not what it would look like from the top of a basketball. No matter if you're a flea on a big rock or whatever they want to say, you're going to see the land in front of you go out and then fall away. Not go up to your eye level and then decide to go fall away. There's just no way.
Yep.
It's funny. We were just talking about, and I don't know if I told you guys this, but a couple weeks ago, and maybe even on 2 shows, at least one, I had a guy, Edric, and he actually works with Dr. Kent Hovind. He's worked with him for about 6 months, right? And so I had him on the show, and he was asking some pretty legitimate questions. He also had some, we could sort of tell that he also had some, globe Earth or heliocentric baggage that he still sort of, because you know how we tend to carry a lot of our heliocentric baggage with us when we try to look at the flat Earth sort of for the first time. And so So it seemed like he was asking a lot of good questions, and one of his big hang-ups was perspective. And I think he gave an example of when they were 8 or 10 miles across the water from some skyline, and he had a lot of issues with mirages. He also had issues. I told him you should try shooting in the twilight because you'll get less, sort of haze off of the water, less atmospheric refraction. So he's going to do some more pictures. But it seemed as if like we were making progress and he was actually looking into it. And then I guess it was yesterday or the day before, I saw a video with Edric, and he was talking with Dr. Kent Hovind, and he was still sort of, placing in the camp of sort of like this crazy theory. Now, I'm not 100% sure if he did that before or after he was on the show with, me and the panel on my show, but it was like his arguments were so basic. I mean, we're literally dealing with, okay, well, how come I can't see the bottoms of these buildings that are, say, I don't know, 10 miles away? And to me, the question is so perfectly answered with the operations of perspective. Say even a 2-foot swell on that water could obscure 300 feet of skyscraper that's 5 miles in the distance. And so but the fact is we don't see this vertical droppage in curvature in terms of over 10 miles. It should be like 66 feet in droppage, or wait, let's see, 10 times 10 is 100 times, is it let me bust out my calculator.
Yeah, that's about right. But let me point this out while you're calculating that, John. This is what I'm showing here is footage that I shot last August from the balcony at our condo on Maui. Okay, and what we're seeing here is we are roughly on the 7th floor, and to give you an idea of how the horizon always rises to eye level, and I think this is such a perfect example. But we look over to this building over here. Okay, and this building is about 7 stories high. So here we are on the 7th floor of our condo, looking across at a building that's 7 stories high, and that would arguably be eye level. Okay, right? And what do we see out here? Here's the horizon, and it comes across, and I mean it is dead nuts on, right at the roof line of that building, that 7-story building that's across from us. And that's just undisputable. And not only does this work at eye level, it works 7 stories high. It works, at 35,000 foot in an airliner. It works on 100,000 foot in a balloon, and it works at 100 and however many thousand feet that the rockets go up. We still see that flat perspective across there. And that's amazing.
If you could maximize that too, and I know this is something that Jaron, you've talked about, but I think that like make it big, you know what I mean?
It is maximized.
Oh, maybe I don't have mine maximized. I don't know. Anyway, but like you can see, like, okay, to the right of the mountain range, you've got that sort of very bright, almost cloud near the ground, and to me, that is obviously going to be sort of like an atmospheric refraction, and you're not going to see anything beyond that point unless possibly you're dealing with like infrareds or something like that. Then maybe you could see beyond that. But in terms of our optical vision, that horizon line is very subjective. Really, I mean, there's so many factors involved. I mean, topography is an obvious one. Even a small wave in the ocean could be considered topography. But then you also have this, how dense is the atmosphere, or how water vapor rich is the atmosphere near the ground, and that's going to have a big determination of your apparent horizon. Let alone your altitude, of course, that plays into it. But I mean, do you see what I'm saying? Like even that horizon there, I believe if it was a clearer day, you probably could have gotten a visibility far beyond that that point, sort of to the right of the mountain range.
Yeah, absolutely. But and what this mountain range is, this isn't actually a mountain range. This is the island of Molokai. So this is Molokai, and then off to the left or just to the south of that would be Lanai. But yeah, this is, and it's covered in clouds, and on a clear day, of course, you can see it perfectly. It doesn't even have to be that clear, but that's the whole thing. What we're looking at here is easily, 5-10 miles off on the distance, something like that. And it doesn't matter. Every time we've ever gone there, it doesn't matter what floor we're on. We always see these things that meet our eye level perfectly on the horizon. And like I said, this one's just one of my favorites because this is a 7-story building. We were on the 7th floor. Perfect, right? There it is.
Dead on balls, as they say in My Cousin Vinny.
Yep. Absolutely. So yeah, so those are, again, these are part of the proofs that I'm trying to bring out, about the horizon and the perspective, and about how it's always rising, no matter what height you're at, and that is just something that's irrefutable. People can say they see curvature, and maybe they do if they're looking through some sort of a convex window in an airplane. I don't know. I haven't been in every single airplane, but I've certainly been in my share of them, and I have never, either as a pilot or a passenger, ever seen any curvature on the horizon whatsoever.
Well, suppose though you're out to sea and just imagine that one sliver and it's that sort of to the right, and I said mountain range, but I guess it would sort of be like a volcanic landmass or whatever, but towards the center of the screen, in between the island and the top of that building, you've sort of got that white haze that's, I don't know, a degree off the ground. Just imagine if you're out at sea and that white haze is all the way around you and there's nothing but that white haze. It would almost be a perfect sphere or perfect circle around you. And so if you get up on top of a mast, and I've done this, it really does sort of give the optical illusion that you're seeing a curve all around you. And to me, I think that's what a lot of people see. Now, especially like you said, from a plane, when you've got convex, or I guess it would be convex windows, that adds to this illusion. And
even your eyes will do it. Your eyes have your collaboration. They're going to pull the edges to closer to you than what your eyes can see straight ahead. That's just going to happen.
Yeah, because our eyes are just convex lenses. I mean, really.
Right.
Certainly not like a fisheye.
No, definitely not. So I mean,
it's level. That's it. Barely anything.
Right. So, but our eyes, for the most part, also go along with things that we we know that have been mechanically leveled, and we can see across many structures. They don't build buildings on a slope unless, of course, you're dealing with a leaning tower of pizza. But other than that, it's all very methodically leveled out. And a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, that's because it's all leveled out, from the reference point of the center of the Earth." And when you think about that, that's just so stupid to even say that, because it's like, how are they leveling it out relative to the center of the Earth? Because in order to even do that, they have to come up with calculations that would hypothesize this Earth being a curved formation anyway, right? So it just doesn't even make any sense. All of the surveyors leveling are done with reference to sea level, and they don't measure curve. The most they can do is measure slopes, because you can't measure curvature. You can't measure curvature around something you can't see with any type of optic, a piece of equipment like a theodolite. So where are they coming up with this? I can measure the curvature. Really? How? You can measure a slope, not curvature, and then of course you can do your imaginary trigonometry to factor in the curvature of the Earth, the alleged curvature of the Earth, but it means nothing, and it's referenced for nothing, and it's used for nothing. So it's nothing more than a construct.
You want to know?
Makes any sense? And tell me if you get this. If John and I were to go out and measure the Earth, okay, and let's say we were just going to do half the distance, so we were just going to do North Pole to South Pole. So that would be 12,500 miles, right? So if they say it's an 8 inches per mile squared, let's say we each had a stick, and we start a mile apart, and we say, okay, it's 8 inches from me to John. And then I walk to where John was, he walks another mile, and we measure again. 8 inches per mile. We keep doing that. So we keep moving the sticks a mile at a time, all the way till we get to the South Pole. Well, that's only 8 inches times 12,500 miles. That's a total of 100,000 inches of curvature. Whereas if you take 12,500 miles and multiply it out in inches, it comes out to 792 million. So I don't even understand their numbers anymore. It's like the 100,000 inches, but we need to make up 792 million miles. I'm sorry, 792 million inches to get from the North Pole to the South Pole. Yet if we keep moving our stick a mile at a time, so how does it even ever work out? I don't even understand how they come up with their numbers anymore.
Well, first of all, did you guys see recently, and I actually believe this is true, so it needs to be verified, but I believe this is true. The regular person named Steven, the rectilineator guy.
Regular person named Steve.
Yeah, he's actually recently, as far as I know, he's retracted his claims that the rectilineator experiment proved a concave Earth and made a public apology. Now, if that's true, it sounds extremely out of character, so I do want to verify it. But
all right, let me clarify that for you, John, really quick.
Sure.
It's not that he's trying to take anything with it. What he said was this, is that when they were down in Texas on that island, they were trying to set up the experiment exactly the same way that Cyrus Teed did, okay? But he found that it was impossible to level out the rectilineators to any degree of accuracy, and forget about anything over a mile or 2 miles. So basically, he said, well, what is very clear to me is that Cyrus Teed lied. He falsified these figures. This is a complete farce. And he goes, and we tried to do it. We know it can't be done. Of course, the thing is Cyrus Teed did a little bit different also, so I'm not sure exactly what he's saying, but he said that basically Cyrus Teed was a fraud, and that's no longer going to be part of his repertoire for proving the concave Earth.
Well, he was Jesus too.
Yeah, he did. And isn't it kind of funny how we actually had, I guess you could say, an apostle of the regular person named Stephen, Ricky Hammonds on the GlobeBusters a while ago, and if I'm not mistaken, maybe I'm misquoting him, but I believe he said that the rectilineator was, quote, the perfect experiment, and it just goes to show you how a lot of what they were purporting was like, as I had called it, chest beating and almost insulting people's intelligence or preying on our egos with, oh no, it's not a flat Earth, how silly is that? We live on the inside of a sphere. But backing up the wagon just a little bit, in terms of the curvature, you guys had mentioned buildings like theodolites leveling things. One thing that I noticed, and I just noticed this, I think yesterday when I was watching I guess it was your newest video, Jared. I believe, and if I'm not mistaken, but the NASA headquarters building, the one that they always try to make it look a lot bigger than it is.
Yeah, the vehicle assembly building.
Is it not wider at the top than it is at the bottom? So it's almost like an upside down pyramid with less, not a perfect pyramid, but it's wider at the top than it is at the bottom, right?
A little bit.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering if the well, I don't want to say anything bad on your show, so we'll just say the engineers, the NASA engineers, and I said that very nicely. I'm just wondering if maybe they used curvature calculations in that giant tall building, hanging say a plumb line from each corner to get their apparent level, and would that not cause the building to be wider at the top if we didn't live on a sphere?
Oh my God! Yeah,
or
right.
maybe they did it as a joke. I don't know. Maybe I've got that backwards. I guess it would be wider at the top if we lived on a sphere. So maybe they did that as to prove that we live on a sphere, when in fact they just designed the building to be wider at the top. Can you pull up an image of it? Because I'm almost positive, and this all sort of just, I guess it was this morning, it all sort of struck me. I'm like, wait a minute, that's the only building I've ever seen that's wider on the top. And I'm almost positive that the big NASA building with the inverted flag where it's got all the
vehicle assembly building. Just look up NASA VAB. And I've done very detailed look at this thing, and it is absolutely a lie, the size that they say it is.
This guy, right?
They say that American flag, the blue part of it, is bigger than a NBA basketball court. Get the F out. It's not even close.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I remember your piece on that and the perspective and how it was looking all odd. But then there was another one.
Is it not wider at the top, or is that just an optical illusion?
I don't know. It kind of looks like it is, but that Yeah, I've never noticed that before. I think it might be an optical illusion because of these things on the side, possibly.
Yeah,
Well, those stick out more than they do at the bottom, so it is kind of bowing out.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know. I was just sort of like piecing this together after I had watched, I think you had put a clip of this in your video. I'm like, wait a minute, that seems wider at the top. And so even if that's just an optical illusion, I suppose they could use the argument, well, the building is so large and so tall that each corner is level, but, right, you've got each corner level to the center of the Earth, and so there is a divergence. But, of course, they claim such a divergence would be so minuscule that it wouldn't be noticeable. My only sort of issue with that is the axis of rotation would be 4,000 miles, not the face of the Earth. But anyway.
Yeah, 526 feet. They say that building is.
526, huh? Now, how that would barely fit a rocket? Aren't the rockets much taller than 500 and something feet?
No, because they have pictures of the. You can see the picture there on top, and the third one over. That's the Saturn or something going inside of it. I mean, but the Statue of Liberty is only, I don't remember now, 302.
You know what it reminds me of, and not to get off onto the whole esoteric thing, but it almost reminds me of the whole story with Osiris, or maybe I'm getting it wrong, but the guy that got chopped up into 14 pieces, and they could his wife or mother or whatever.
Osiris.
Yes. Osiris, yeah, they couldn't find his man parts, and so every time you see an obelisk like the Washington Monument or the one at the Vatican, that's what that represents, and it's almost as if when they you can see them taking the pretty obviously phallic symbol shuttle and inserting it into that sort of I guess you could say crevasse. And yeah, I mean, is it just me, or is that possibly symbolic of some sort of a esoteric mystery religion? Right.
Why? Yeah, I don't understand why you wouldn't construct it laying down. So, I mean, it just seems to me like, yeah, that would be definitely the case. I mean, the Statue of Liberty from her heel to the top of her head is 110 feet. So you're talking 5 Statue of Liberties?
Wow.
No way.
Yeah, and there's a Mustang like in the picture, and the first picture that we looked at, that's like, I don't know, it seems like you could stack maybe 20 of them, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, arguing, from an aerodynamic point of view, the rocket, phallic symbol or not, would be the correct shape aerodynamically, obviously, to shoot up with minimum wind resistance. You would have kind of a tapered shape, just kind of like the leading edge of an airfoil on an airplane wing. And in this case, it's a little bit backwards, because what you're doing is you're penetrating the wind first with a very small portion of the nose and causing this divergence of the atmosphere or the wind in front of it to be split out around the...
So what steers it, Bob?
I'm sorry?
What steers it?
Well, what steers it apparently would be, from what they say, they're able to change the orientation of the main rockets themselves. Either that, or once they've been discarded, they've got
compressed oxygen, I believe, but while they're in atmosphere, I think they've got little flippers like you've got on an airplane. I know that's not the right word, but those little flippers, like if you're in the atmosphere, they could use those little flippers. But once they get out into outer space, I believe, I'm 99% sure they claim that they use compressed oxygen to sort of, to get the pitch and yaw factor.
Which is nonsense. Nonsense. And yeah, you're right. I mean, theoretically, the best thing to do aerodynamically in the atmosphere would be to have some sort of an empennage, or like, the tail section of an aircraft, where you're essentially just diverting air to one side or the other, and whether or not you want to look at it as just diverting air, or look at it via Bernoulli's principle, which would be a change of pressure around the control surface itself. Either way, that would seem to me that would be the best way to actually steer it. But you don't see anything like that on the rocket.
And I always think it's so funny when they launch the shuttle, they call it, roll program. Okay, roll. And it's like, no, that's because it's too heavy. That's the heavy side. So it rolls. It has no other choice because you just launched a rocket that has a big old heavy thing on it, and it rolls on its back because that's what's going to happen. It's not a roll
Yeah.
program. Oh, we have to be upside down when we're flying. No, because it's heavy. It's heavy, so it falls to the bottom. It's like it's just their little sayings for everything is ridiculous.
Well, and even that aside, and after I make this point, I'm going to go refill up my drink. But something that I've been sort of, I don't know, struggling with, and we all understand how rocket propulsion theoretically, technically cannot work in space. And even if it did, a rocket would be completely uncontrollable because, like Bob said, the rocket relies on that sort of back pressure of all that air rushing towards the nose to keep it stable. When you lose that air pressure, you lose stability and you lose thrust. But what my issue is when these items get into microgravity, and so they're no longer affected by, the quote-unquote pull of the Earth in the heliocentric model. My issue is any object that's traveling. There's an equation to figure out if it's accelerating or if it's going to travel at a constant rate. But if any of those variables in the equation drop to zero, then you essentially have no velocity. You're going to lose any momentum, velocity, inertia is going to be null and void if any of those variables go to zero. And so my question is, and then I am going to rudely sort of run and refill my little drink here, but my question is like, okay, if they're up there weightless, technically, yeah, the item still has mass, but it's weightless. How can they possibly maintain momentum or maintain a velocity or, maintain their inertia if there is no sort of value to its mass? So, and I'll be right back. I just got to go to the fridge and refill this. So maybe kick that around a bit, if I made any sense at all.
Okay. Yeah, you made
Thanks.
sense to me, and that's a very valid point, John. And so let me get back to that in just a second, but I wanted to kind of zoom in on the tail section here of the amateur rocket, apparently the world's biggest amateur rocket or whatever, and notice that it has these kind of like rudder stabilizers that are on it. Now, on an airplane, these are used for both vertical and horizontal stability, but in addition to it, like the rudder on an aircraft would have this back section kind of hinged where you could manipulate the back, the trailing edge of this surface left and right, which would obviously divert wind left and right and would have an effect very profoundly on the attitude of the rocket. So it's interesting because when this rocket goes up, obviously, due to whatever effects, it is spinning greatly, which would be, almost indicative that these fins weren't even there, because the whole purpose of these fins would be partially for vertical stability and also spin stability, therefore not having so much spin. For whatever reason, that didn't work so well. But
either that, or the rocket was stationary and it was the Earth spinning.
Yeah, oh, well, that was it. Yeah, 10,000 RPM.
Hey,
So-
it's all relative, man. Remember, it's all relative.
Yeah, it's all relative. So, but you don't even see these things on the NASA rockets. I guess they're just too cool to have anything like this. And also you have to wonder, how is it, whatever the spin is, that's causing it to spin like that, which I would guess has something to do very much with the power plant inside of it.
The rocket was
the rocket
drunk.
itself.
No,
Yeah,
it was drunk.
So, but they don't even use that. So, and yet when you see the TV camera footage from the Saturn V, it's perfectly stable. It's not spinning around wildly, even though it has no type of stabilization fins on it like this thing does. And like I said, not that it did a whole lot of good on this, because we saw the result of how it started spinning wildly, but. So they're not using any type of control surface. Therefore, one would have to assume that it would have to be by either displacing another rocket, or displacing the air via another rocket engine, or like you said, oxygen, like a fire extinguisher kind of. That always reminds me of that scene in Gravity, where Sandra Bullock and George Clooney, they're blown out away from the space shuttle, so somehow he gets a hold of a fire extinguisher and starts discharging that into space, and giving you the idea, of course, that that would have some
with
sort
a
of legitimate propulsion.
with a gaping hole in his mask, no less. Right?
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I can't remember that part, but I looked at that and I'm like, oh my God, seriously. But see,
Yeah,
they
he
want you
holds
to
his
believe
breath.
stuff like that.
He holds his breath.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, and even if that was, possible without his face exploding, whatever. but you
Or his
you
eyes
have to,
boiling.
yeah, or his eyes, popping out like Arnold Schwarzenegger's did when he, fell out the Mars window in Total Recall.
Not a tumor.
Yeah, pretty crazy stuff. So, a lot of this you have to wonder how it's supposed to work, and because you certainly don't see any jets, countering the spin or any attitude or anything like that going off, and there's no control surfaces. So it's like, what the heck is it then?
Well,
that's the thing that doesn't make any sense to me.
from what I gather, the Go Fast rocket that's been pointed to a lot as being the highest amateur rocket ever fired, they had a very inexpensive, not innovation, but solution to this spinning. Where, yeah, that Go Fast rocket spins its butt off all the way up, but then you hear this sort of, and that's this anti-spin module kicking in, which is essentially sort of a gyroscopic set of magnets. This is an oversimplified version.
It's called a yo-yo D-spin mechanism.
Yeah, anti-spin, whatever, but it's to prevent the rocket from spinning when it out of control when it gets into these very super or like very lightly dense areas of the atmosphere. And so I think that NASA, spent obviously billions of dollars to come up with this sort of solution. And of course, the Go Fast rocket team put something together that's just as adequate in a smaller rocket for, pennies on the dollar, or pennies on the $1 billion, of course.
Yeah, absolutely
compared to NASA, that is.
Yep. So I noticed you guys this morning on your chat this morning, which I blissfully slept through, but you guys were up, and I loved your $1,000 bet that the ISS couldn't stay online for an hour.
And they were trying so hard.
I know.
Because I couldn't believe the amount of people who were commenting on that video that I put out the day before yesterday, just saying, dropping links to the ISS Live, saying, "Here it is, 24 hours. What are you crying about?" I was just like losing my mind. Like, are these people kidding me? And I just thought, you know what? I've watched it enough times. We've watched it all enough times to know that thing is not going an hour without popping a blue screen. So
it doesn't even make it a half an hour.
No.
My question is, Bob, we heard them talking a lot. Now, do you typically mute the live feed in terms of they have like an audio chatter going on between, Houston and the alleged ISS astronauts?
I do typically mute it. Well, I didn't used to, but I do now because they'll usually wind up saying something right in the middle of our conversation when we're not even really paying attention to it. And sometimes they say things that it's like, well, wait a minute, it doesn't make any sense what you just said if you're really broadcasting from space. But I think they keep a pretty close, vest that pretty close to the vest.
I was curious because we heard a lot of chatter, and like I could have sworn they were like, "Yep, and I want some KFC, extra gravy, extra crispy." No, it wasn't that bad, but it was. Yeah, they weren't making any sense, and so I was just like, "Wow, these guys are talkative today." But no, that's probably a wise move to mute them, because they were literally talking about just absolute garbage. They were like, "Okay, well, you can talk to your family after we get back out of the dark side," and then it went blue. But then even when it was blue, they were still talking like, they still had communication, so it didn't make any sense. I mean, it was really ridiculous. But yeah, right on the money. As soon as they hit the twilight zone, the terminating line, it was like clockwork. I was like, seriously? I was like, they're gonna pull it off. They're gonna do 2 straight hours. But no. First of all, the first 25 minutes was blue screen, right?
We didn't get any takers anyway.
No takers.
I'll still say that bet is open, so if somebody wants to email me, go ahead and email me, and we'll go live, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, that would be a fixed bet, that's for sure, because there's no way. I mean, they can't do it, first of all.
They can't.
And even, the thing that really kills me is that, the fact that they lose contact with it That's
Like
just
no
the dumbest
satellite
thing.
I guess.
Yeah, no satellite, and worse yet, they're saying that even though they've got easily 30 to 40% of the entire Earth in view, supposedly, that somewhere in that line of sight, they can't make a signal propagate down to a ground station to keep it online. That's just the stupidest thing ever. And the other thing that blows me away too is how much delay they use when they're doing these events, talking to the astronauts.
I can't stand that.
I know they actually put this 5-10 second event, and when you calculate it, when you actually calculate the time that it takes in free space for a signal to go from Earth to the moon, it winds up being milliseconds, right? Thousands, maybe a few
I
thousandths
think
of
to
a
the moon,
second.
to the moon, it's like 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds there and back, but not to
No,
250 miles.
it's not that much, I don't think. Let's bring up a calculator here.
To the ISS, it would be not even noticeable. That's like me calling, Los Angeles from San Francisco. I'm not going to have a delay on my call.
Right. So if you take 186,000 miles per second and you divide that by 250 miles, all right.
Well, you said the moon.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't mean the moon, but yeah, okay, the moon, whatever. Either way, even at 200, it would be just slightly over a second. You're right, because if it's 240,000 miles and it's 186,000 miles per second, we're talking about not even quite a second and a half. But when you're looking at that, to the ISS,
Oh, it's nothing.
it's nothing. It's just a few milliseconds. And so, what is the whole idea behind this 10-second delay? It's like, what is it, processing?
You got to bring up one of that guy's videos that I told you to watch. There's one video that's real short, but he kind of plays on that idea of waiting the comment and then having to sit there for 5 seconds and wait. What was that guy's name? Poncho Pete or something? I keep forgetting his name.
Oh, was it Poncho Pete? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I still have that video up.
Here's one way I think about it too. I've had bosses or clients even that would fire you for being 15 minutes late for work. I've seen people be fired for not having enough fresh pepperoni pizza on the bar when I worked at CC's. I've had clients that would fire you for not knowing in real time off the top of your head what's going on with each of 20 current clients, as well as hundreds of potential clients, within a minute or two. That was part of my job, was to know exactly what was going on with all these different entities. Really, I could just look it up in the CRM within a matter of 30 seconds. But if I wasn't able to do that, I would lose my contract. I would be fired. And yet NASA, and I wasn't making anywhere near, 20 billion a year, let alone 20 billion in 1,000 lifetimes. But yet NASA, the $20 billion a year venture, gets lost in space for most of every hour. And to me, this is just a huge lapse in accountability, and whether, the Globers will say, well, it's infrastructure, or like the guy that introduced Chucky holding your money at the State of the NASA address, he said, quote, "It's hard to be NASA." And, we just give them all these passes, but in a real world situation, NASA would have been fired a long time ago from frickin' CC's Pizza. You know what I mean? So it is just ridiculous how we just allow them so much leeway, and their proof of them being in microgravity is doing bugs.
They're given all leeway. They're allowed to make any mistake. There's nothing that they could do that would ever prove that they're wrong, according to those who believe in them. I mean, I've said before that if we uncovered a bunch of dirt in Nevada, and inside of under this dirt was a huge warehouse, and in that warehouse was the exact moon landing setup. Everything there still, the LEM, the cameras, nothing had been touched since that day. People would simply say, no, somebody put that there. It's a setup. You guys are trying to set up NASA. So it doesn't matter what we ever found. They're just going to be believed because people know what the ulterior means, which means space is fake.
Yeah, well, there's no other conclusion.
Yep, that's absolutely true. So anyway, so moving back to it, here's another area of allegedly Dave talking about the crepuscular waves, and also when we are looking at the sunlight from above the clouds, we still see a divergence pattern, which would not be caused by refraction, because theoretically you're above the atmosphere here, the horizon, and yet you can look at this picture very clearly and see the lighting on the clouds is corresponding to this angular, sun ray that's coming down. Now, one of the things that I think is really amazing is, again, this is shown to us, right in front of our face with the Illuminati symbol, the Mason symbol, where you have the sun on top of the pyramid. And it's basically showing us that it's very near, very close, directly above the Earth. And again, you still have this incredible hotspot. Now, one of the people that we may or may not talk about today, because honestly, I just look at these people as trolls, but his position is that, oh, well, it's just a reflection. When we see the dog cam and the sun hotspot right over the Earth, oh, well, that's just a reflection. I was like, no, this is not.
That guy has obviously never taken one single art class ever.
Obviously, yeah. I mean, and the rest of his
that one area too.
Yeah.
I mean, let's go get a magnifying glass and a mirror and shine it on his neck from a distance and just tell him it's just a reflection, dude. Don't worry about it. It's just a reflection. See what happens to your neck.
Yeah. When it's very clear that every time it's ever been photographed, like this, or the dog cam picture, or any number of other photographs, it's always got that hot spot, right underneath it, or reflection or whatever. But I mean, it's always present, and it indicates very much that the sun is very close. This would not happen where you would have such a concentrated hot spot, from an object 93 million miles away. And they say, well, the sun has to be 93 million miles away. It's like, really? No, I don't think so, because if you look at it by using plain old trigonometry, Pythagorean math, it's kind of like when you made the statement a while back, and when you were debating with Reds Redrick, and you said, well, the sun and the moon are basically 3,000 miles up, and then he came out with this video where he had his observer in Florida and he's in California, and they each took this measurement of the sun angle, or excuse me, of the moon angle, and then did all this math and factored in the curvature of the Earth, and lo and behold, factored in the curvature. That is a big thing right there. They found that, oh, lo and behold, gee, look, Juranerism is a moron because the moon's 240,000 miles away. And of course, TJ turned that right around and said, okay, but if we do that exact same calculation, on the observed moon, and we omit the curvature of the Earth hypothetical number, it comes out that the moon is about 3,400 miles away. And then, of course, obviously, since the sun and the moon are clearly the same size in the sky, whether or not you want to accept that the sun is allegedly 400 times larger and 400 times further away, the bottom line is what we see and observe of the sun and the moon is they are the same size. Therefore, if you take the exact same experiment and you do the same angles on the sun, same observations, apply the exact same trigonometry, guess what? The sun comes back at somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 miles, depending. But the bottom line is it's not 93 million miles away.
And taking that even a step further, something that Brian, the dude that did the whole $5,000 NASA Eclipse Challenge, and we talked about this earlier, Jaron, but the number that he came to using all sorts of real data was the really close, if not exactly, the alleged axis, or I'm sorry, the radius of the Earth itself. And so what it appears that they've done is they've taken the actual, or at least the apparent distance to the sun, and called that distance the radius of the Earth. And when in doing so, it really helps to sort of perpetuate their numbers, because you're dealing with essentially 4,000 miles in either direction, if that makes any sense. Even though the sun is much closer, it's obviously not 93 million miles. The Earth obviously is not a sphere, it's a plane. But in order to support their spherical model, they just use the distance to the sun, and it sort of works with the radius of the Earth. I just thought that was very interesting. That, and even Dr. Robotham, I believe that the figure that he used in his book was just shy of 4,000 miles in terms of the distance to the sun. Now, to me, that is a little bit of a slippery slope, because there may be a difference between where we on the ground apparently reckon the sun to be and where the sun actually is. And one of the reasons I believe that, at least in terms of the moon, and you guys, I believe you all agree with me that high altitude footage of the moon, it always appears very small and faint. Yet from the ground, a full moon is very brilliant and bright and exactly the same size as the sun. And so what that tells me is that at least the troposphere, or whatever's between our eye and the moon, is magnifying the moon a great deal and almost making it look, vertical. I mean, we always see the moon as a vertical disk, but I don't think that necessarily means it is a vertical disk, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. Absolutely.
Mine's blown. I know. I'm sorry.
Mine's blown. I know. No problem. I was just kind of looking for this part in TJ's video, basically where he's putting in the curvature of the Earth and proving Red's rhetoric's figure, and then simply taking out that 0.6 degrees, which would be the curvature of the Earth, and how it comes out to be the moon about 3,400 miles. So again, mathematically, it works either way. And if you want to build a hypothetical mathematical model, fine, go ahead and do so. That doesn't mean, just because you have built that mathematical model, doesn't mean that it matches any semblance of reality whatsoever. And as again, like when allegedly Dave pointed out, that if the Earth is indeed refracting the sunlight, like NASA says that it is, then Eratosthenes' calculations were completely lost in space. They were bunk. They were irrelevant and invalidated. So, yeah, there's always a couple different ways to look at things, and the math can be deceiving. One of the other arguments that this person that we're going to be kind of going through his alleged debunking of flat Earth memes, let's see, is that he makes his statement, you can prove anything with mathematics. And he says, no, you can't. You can't prove anything with mathematics. And I would beg to differ, because the reason you can prove anything with mathematics is it all has to do with the story that surrounds the mathematics, the model, the framework, if you will. Mathematics can actually be used to prove directly observed phenomenon, but it can also be used to prove something that is entirely fictitious, simply in the way that it is told. And I kind of want to tell this story again. It's a very brief story, but I've told it before. But this is just an example of how mathematics can seem very credible. However, when it is framed in a story framework, you can see very clearly that there's something wrong with the mathematics, even though when framed in the particular story, there's something wrong with that. And I'm, of course, referring to the famous three men who go to a hotel story. I'm going to tell that really quick. So three men go to a hotel, and they need a room for the night, and there's only one room left, and they go up to their clerk and they say, we need the hotel room. We know there's only one left, so we'll take it. The hotel clerk says, well, that'll be $30. Great. So each man gets out a $10 bill, and they each hand the clerk $10, a total of $30. Well, then they go up to their room. After that, the hotel clerk discovers that the room was on sale for actually $25 for that night, so he summons the bellboy, gives the bellboy 5 $1 bills, says go up to these three men's room and give them back their money and tell them that we made a mistake. So the bellboy goes up, knocks on the door, the first guy answers the door, and the bellboy says, sorry, your room was only $25, here's $5 back. And the guy says, well, we can't really split this up evenly, so we'll just give you a $2 tip and we'll each take $1 back. So he gives the bellboy the $2 tip. He keeps $1 and he gives a $1 back to the other two men. So when we look at this, we know that whenever you shell out a $10 bill and you get back $1, you have shelled out $9. That's obvious, right? So if each man shelled out $10 and got $1 back, that means that each man shelled out $9 apiece. So 9 times 3 is 27. They gave the bellboy $2. That's 29. What happened to the other dollar, right? So you see the problem there is not looking at it from the story point of view. It validates the math, because we all know that if we give somebody $10 and they give us $1 back, then we spent $9. It's there's no arguing with that. But we know that something is amiss because there's $1 missing here. But see how it's been cleverly covered up in the way that the story has been told. And this is exactly what NASA does so many times. So I just kind of wanted to throw that in there for your comments.
Well, jumping back real quick, and I'll try to comment on that, and that sort of went, but I think I understand what you're saying. But in terms of the we were talking about crepuscular rays, and I think of this, and we were always taught in school that sunlight comes in at parallel lines. Right, and on a local level, that's true. I mean, if you're standing outside, or let's just say you're standing in a room or an outside area with a bunch of columns, the shadows from all those columns locally to you, and trees and everything, and your shadow, all those shadows are going to be parallel lines. And so, it is sort of an astute observation that, the sunlight is coming in at perfectly straight parallel lines, but that's on a very local microscopic level in terms of the Earth as a whole. Now, if you were to instantly travel, east 500 miles, then you'd notice the same thing. However, if you were to triangulate, based on those two shadows at the same time, you'd notice that no, the sunlight is not coming in at parallel lines. It's coming in from the direction of the sun relative to your position to it. And so it's that sort of, it's almost like, I don't know, I wouldn't call it stupidity, but I would just call it almost simple-mindedness to assume that since we, on the very microscopic level in the grand scheme of things, see parallel lines or parallel shadows cast by the sun, to assume, therefore, that all sun rays are coming in at parallel lines. And that's the sort of assumption that Eratosthenes used. But of course, he assumed that the Earth was a sphere. But again, going back to what allegedly Dave had mentioned, is that, again, it's sort of a checkmate situation, because you can't have your cake and eat it too. So I think it's great that he pointed that out. And did you guys? I had noticed on Facebook that he is either getting ready to, or maybe he's already done, some sort of a pretty mainstream show, like a TV show in Macedonia, or something like that. Did you guys notice anything about that or hear?
No.
Not me.
Yeah, supposedly he's going to be doing some sort of a mainstream, either a debate or a presentation in the flat Earth, and I just sort of very endearingly and humbly begged him to please just ixnay on the drinking piss just for that, just for the show, just for the one show. But hey, each his own. He can say what he wants to say, obviously. Just a humble request. But yeah, that was going back to the whole thing with crepuscular rays, and I think that it's also probably very possible that we're seeing one set of convergent rays when we're down here in the troposphere, and if you go up several thousand feet, you're seeing an entirely different set of convergent rays. I think that I'm leaning more towards that the sun, as opposed to being a physical, tangible, perfectly understood object, is more of a subjective object that really depends on a lot of things, including your altitude, what spectrum you're looking in, and I'm totally convinced that it's not, helium and hydrogen undergoing this theoretical atomic fusion process, which is just theory. But what was the question? there was an original question, and I had to get back. I wanted to jump back on that because I'd actually made a note, and I wanted to make that point. So, but what did you originally say, Bob? I'm so sorry.
I think I was originally talking about how mathematics could be, factored into anything, and necessarily. His statement where he said you can prove anything with mathematics, or he says the flat earthers are saying that, and he's saying no, that's not true, and I'm saying yes, it is true, and the reason it's true is because of how you can put the mathematics or the question into a certain framework, and that's what led me to the whole three guys in the hotel thing. So yeah, it basically comes down to his statement where he says we're saying you can prove anything with mathematics, and I would agree with that, that you can prove anything with mathematics, even fiction, provided
it's actually true.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that it's absolutely true, even though the mathematics, behind it, just like the three guys spending $9 a piece and tipping the bellboy $2 comes out to $29. Well, there's obviously a problem there, but it was framed in such a way that it kind of supported the lie. So that was my point and rebuttal to him.
My only thing would be is that mathematics can absolutely describe reality, and it can describe scenarios, but in terms of proof, I think that you really have to go to physical experiments to prove something. Mathematics can make something seem to be theoretically viable.
I agree 100%, John. Yeah, and that's exactly what I am saying, that yes, it can prove things in that sense, but it can also be used to quote-unquote prove something that is completely fallacy.
Yeah, orbital mechanics, they can that's proven with math. Great. It doesn't mean that it's possible.
Well, what about E equals mc squared? That's a beautiful, simple theory, but when are they going to accelerate some tangible amount of matter to the speed of light squared? It's never going to happen. Therefore, it's pseudoscience because you can't demonstrate it or falsify it. It's just another one of those things where we put these highly esteemed quote-unquote geniuses on a pedestal, and the scientific community just follows along with them because that's what they're ultimately controlled to do. I mean, it's just the same exact thing with the American Dental Association pushing fluoride. The same exact thing. It's just the scientific community following the herd and following the funding. Same thing goes.
That's exactly right.
Global warming. Yeah. I mean, it's all over the place.
Yeah, and beyond that, John, I mean, speaking of E equals mc squared, E equals mc squared, meaning energy equals mass times the speed of light, or c squared. Okay, now that's all fine and dandy, but there's a big problem with it, and Brian Mullen pointed this out, and it blew my mind when he did. But when you think about that, it's like, first of all, we know how much energy there is in sunlight. I mean, terawatts, gigawatt, I mean, ungodly amounts of power can be harvested from sunlight, and yet it's a wave. So the wave, whether they say that it's part particle and part wave, sunlight is arguably mostly wave, which means that it really has no mass, or no mass as far as anything that would be calculable that could actually bring any truth to the equation of E equals mc squared. Because if you have zero mass and you multiply that times the speed of light squared, then your energy equation is going to be zero. And we know that is absolutely not true, because there is energy in light, and there's a lot of energy in light, but somehow when it's put under the scrutiny of E equals mc squared, well, all of a sudden there's no energy in light. So, gee, there's a problem there, right?
That's really interesting, and one thing that I would just add, and I'm sure Jaron has plenty to say about this too, but I think that we often misunderstand light fundamentally, and not to profess to you guys, because I know I'm preaching to the choir on this one, but by the time we experience light here in the in the tropoplane on the ground, it's a different thing than it was when it left the sun, whatever the sun is. That light, these electromagnetic electromagnetic waves have passed through all sorts of different media and barriers, and essentially has diffused into the visible spectrum, and apparently very much excites the atmosphere. It makes it glow bright blue when we're talking about sunlight, and it actually, you get a byproduct of that light, which is heat energy. And of course, that's the whole theory, but what we think of as light here on the ground is something completely different to what light actually is. We're used to experiencing the side effects of light, which again, that's sort of this excitement of the atmosphere, heat, the bluifying of the sky, and all of these wonderful things that are very much taken for granted, but also very kind of cool to study and understand. But at the same time, we tend to take those sort of earth-based understandings of light and try to apply it to what's going on in, say, the astral plane. And I think that it's premature to do that. I don't think that light up in those high altitudes is necessarily bound to the same sort of laws and conditions that we have here on the ground.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, very true. So, okay. Wow, I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with this?
Sorry,
That's
my
okay.
bad, man.
Oh, well, no, it wasn't your fault. I was actually kind of getting caught up in the chat, trying to figure out what was going on in the chat. But I'll let the mods handle that. So anyway, so getting back to Neil deGrasse Tyson's and D. Murphy's information on it. Gosh, I wanted to go back and get to some of these questions like the microgravity. And also, okay, yeah, let's go back to his question of how are we even breathing right now? And he says, look, how is it that you can have an atmosphere that is essentially right next to an alleged perfect vacuum, and it doesn't just completely suck off all of the atmosphere? How is that even possible? There would have to be a zone of perfect equilibrium at some point, around the sphere of the Earth, where the gravity is keeping this perfect equilibrium between the vacuum trying to suck the atmosphere out and the gravity holding it in. So it would seem to me that would be a very precarious balance. And he's talking about what happens when you have thermals, which are large columns of air rising, and they keep rising and rising and rising. Wouldn't that tend to destabilize this equilibrium that would necessarily have to be present in the atmosphere in order to keep this delicate balance of us, losing all of our atmosphere? And that is a very, very valid question, because first of all, you think about that, and if all we're talking about is a very, very thin layer of atmosphere that's up at that altitude, and we have constant, hurricane force winds, we have winds rising, we have winds falling, air currents falling, we have all kinds of perturbations that are being made by, jet aircraft, volcanoes, ocean tides, I mean, you name it, just the general activity. How is it possible that our environment, our atmosphere, is not just, going away to space? That's impossible to me. That is a completely impossible situation. We have nothing where we can compare that to as an analog in the real world, where gravity simply holds down, something that, as opposed to a vacuum force, where, even a weak vacuum force will totally tear off any type of air or atmosphere, or take it out of any type of closed container. Well, see, that's the whole thing. They're always talking about how, yes, well, we're a closed system here, and therefore that's why when you fly up in an airplane, the atmosphere is spinning with the Earth, and therefore, everything is relative. It's a closed system, but in fact, I submit that is not true. It is not a closed system. What would make it a closed system, and maybe it is a closed system from this perspective, but what would make it a closed system is if there was a great big huge glass dome over the top of us, And if that were true, then we could probably spin all over the place, and again, our atmosphere would be held in. But the point is,
Coriolis effect.
yeah, and whatever that equates to be.
No, they can have their cake and eat it too. And if I could just say something real quick, and I'll pass it back. But gravity has this equilibrium between space and our atmosphere. I would say that it is summarily impossible, because it's impossible to construct a quote perfect vacuum chamber out of a theory of gravity versus a theoretical vacuum in the first place. That's just physically impossible, even if there is that theoretical vacuum. Gravity has no attributes to act like essentially an airtight cage. But Bob, what you said is absolutely correct, that the heliocentric model must be a totally closed off system, just simply because of the velocities involved and the fact that they claim that the atmosphere is perfectly velcroed to the face of the Earth relative to the spin and all. You can't have any sort of give or take on either end of that. And so, yeah, gravity has to act like essentially a perfectly spherical, I don't know, glass bubble in the heliocentric model, whereas in the flat Earth model, you don't need any sort of bubble or dome. I mean, I think we have good evidence for semi-physical, plasma, electromagnetic fields, and that sort of thing, possibly giving some pressurization to our system. But I just think that the whole heliocentric model is falsified. Indeed, because of the very fact that we have atmosphere. And this is sort of confirmed by their fake trips to the moon. When you land on the moon, you land in the vacuum of space on the moon. There is no atmosphere, there is no barometric pressure. And so, to me, that was a good proof that they were at least lying, because everyone knows that the barometric pressure on Earth is far more powerful than gravity. It's 14.7 pounds per square inch, although there is a buoyant force. The barometric pressure at sea level is extremely powerful, and gravity has not as much to do with it as people think. And so you'd think that if they landed on the moon, even just a simple hop would have sent them flying way off into space, because, again, you've got way less gravity, of course, but you also have zero barometric pressure. They were in the vacuum of space. So, yeah, it just goes to show that at least they were lying. But anyway, I sort of digressed, but hopefully it was on point just a little.
Yeah, definitely. I totally understood what you were saying. And, and again, this kind of takes us back to, what he's showing here with the atmosphere. If it wasn't, or if it actually was Velcro to the Earth, then we also have different problems with rotational speeds at different latitudes. And I brought this up before, where, if the air or the atmosphere is spinning at the equator, basically at surface level at 1,039 or 1,040 miles an hour, that means that for every mile you go up, that speed is increasing, with relation to the surface of the Earth. So by the time you get up another 250 miles, that means that particular point in space is going considerably faster than 1,039 miles an hour. So conversely, if the atmosphere is Velcro to it, that means that every single point along that elevation as you go up from the equator has got to be spinning at a different speed with respect to the atmosphere that is either right below it or right above it. And if we are doing 1,039 at the surface at the equator, and at the North Pole, if we're standing there, we're essentially doing 0 because we're on the axis point. That means that somewhere in between that 0 and 1,040 miles an hour, we have got to be crossing the subsonic supersonic barrier. And we all know what happens when that happens. There is a massive disturbance. So not only should it be happening at surface level, somewhere along that, a latitude between 0 and 90 at the equator, but then there's also going to be variations and striations of that as you go up above. There's going to be also mismatches in speeds, and speeds that are completely different to other speeds at different locations and different elevations along there. In other words, our atmosphere would be an absolute hurricane mess all over the place, and yet we never see that. What we do see is we see spiraling weather patterns that are going different directions, supposedly on the hemisphere. And yes, we can explain that, with diamagnetics, and we talked about that before, and we can talk about that even more. But there's so many other explanations that come into mind when you're looking at this stuff. People just get caught up in these ball Earth physics and try to apply it to the flat Earth model and debunk the flat Earth using ball Earth ideas, and you can't do that. So, yeah.
No,
you guys got something?
That's totally what they do, Jaron. What do you think?
No, I mean, it's obvious to me. I think that people need to just look at the facts that were given for the globe and realize that they're not really facts, that they're just a bunch of conjecture. They get as far as they can besides proving it. Going back to the ISS, there's no reason that you have a tin can orbiting the Earth for 16 years and never supply 24/7 video footage. There's 24/7 video footage of Andy Warhol's grave. There's 24/7 video footage of basically almost every beach in the United States. You could find a 24-hour video footage of anything, the panda cam at the zoo, but not of the Earth because it goes on the dark side or because they can't set the aperture right on the night side. Like you can't get two cameras and program one for night and one for day. It's just ridiculous, and we just keep letting them get away with it, keep letting them get away with it. They never have to prove anything, and yet people want to fight on their behalf when they don't prove anything. I mean, why can't we see a live camera from one of these satellites as it's deployed and get to see it go out and get into its little position and stay there and start orbiting with the Earth? And why can't we see one of the cameras or the telescope that they send out 1,000,000 miles to the sun? They don't think people would want to watch that. It's just ridiculous to see all the planets as they're orbiting. Nothing that they claim is ever proven. It's just conjecture, and they get away with giving you the least amount of information possible so that you just have no choice but to believe it.
Well, and, I always go back to Murphy's Law, which is, I mean, I've been on this world for 35 years now, and one thing that I've learned is Murphy's Law is definitely the case. And some people are luckier than others, but essentially Murphy's Law is that on a given time span, eventually anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And if you apply Murphy's Law to the ISS, which is a very expensive, precarious, beacon of civilization, I mean, that's like, that's the best of the best technology, allegedly orbiting the Earth. But allegedly, you've got all these satellites, you've got space junk, you've got meteoroids like little shooting stars, you've got things the size of grains of sand, pebbles, or even baseball size and larger. And it's not a matter of if the ISS is going to get hit with even, say, a pebble-sized meteoroid. It's a matter of when, because they're supposedly in the thermosphere. There's lots of stuff, coming and going and orbiting all sorts of wild velocities, allegedly, according to them, that eventually it's just going to happen to where one of these super high velocity, and again, weight isn't that big of a deal when you're talking about high velocity. I think force is tripled with speed, if I'm not mistaken. And so, I'd much rather be hit by a 10-ton truck at 1 mile an hour than to be hit by a 1-ounce pebble at 10,000 miles an hour, right? Because that pebble, or even say, up to 50,000 miles an hour, if you're talking about relative speed contrary to the ISS, eventually something like this is going to happen. And it's just really amazing. They've been very lucky. They've been blessed. I mean, they should really be like, every second they're up there just counting their blessings that nothing has ever happened up there. But the reason that it just becomes so phony is that they don't take any sort of safety protocols that would be 100% necessary in reality.
Yeah. And another thing about that, John, also is even when they supposedly, allegedly do get hit by a micrometeorite that causes damage to the station, and the only time that I'm aware of this ever happening where where it was actually made a lot of press was like 2 or 3 years ago. And what was funny about that was every space agency that had a dog in the race basically up there gave pictures of the oh gosh, the solar panel that actually got hit, right? And Roscosmos did one, the European Space Agency did one, NASA did one, and this is all, by the way, on Simon's forum, Clues forum, where they cover this in depth. But what it shows is that the pictures of the damage that was done to the solar collector on the ISS was totally different as submitted by the 3 or 4 different space agencies that submitted a picture. Not only was the damage different, but the entire construct of the solar collector was different. It was completely, totally different. I mean, it was a riot because, they're having a field day with this, obviously. It's like, God, they can't even get their structure correct. Not only is the damage different, but the array itself is completely different, and individualized to each space agency that submitted these pictures. So, I mean, they can't even get that right. They're so bonehead. But, of course, people never question that. They just see the picture and, oh yeah, that's great, whatever. They don't ever scrutinize what they're seeing. They don't look at NASA with suspicious eyes because basically that is something that we just take for granted because the mainstream news says so and NASA says so and they're the authority, and if somebody was ever going to bust them, well, how come the Russians or the Chinese didn't? Because we have this Cold War thing going on and they certainly would have told on each other. It's like, no, that's not the case at all. In fact, that only reinforces the idea that they're all at the very top levels all in this together very clearly. Just like, how can they have such coherence on things that don't make any sense, like the Antarctic Treaty? How is it that, with all those resources that are, supposedly down there, the coal and the oil that Admiral Byrd says can last us, next and well into the next generations, no greedy corporation has ever taken advantage of this, and there isn't
publicly
yeah,
they have it.
Yeah, publicly. Yeah, and if they're even doing it all, because it's really hard to say. But especially at the time that the treaty was signed, which was back in the 50s, that was like Mark Sargent says, that was the land of 10-cent gas. Everything was completely commercialized. There was no such thing as, oh, we have to save the rainforest. That just wasn't happening back then. And the entire attitude towards the earth was to just simply rape it and take everything we can get out of it for the sake of the dollar. And capitalism rules. But obviously the problem with capitalism is it ultimately leads to extinction. But that's a whole other subject altogether.
Well, that's very true. And one thing I'll just add, and then maybe pass it over to Jaron. But over the years I've done lots of different jobs, including construction jobs, and I'll put on the hard hat and the safety goggles and the gloves for safety reasons, because honestly I'm a little bit clumsy and I'm kind of tall, so I have bumped my head on many a rebar, and some of that stuff may be electrified, so it doesn't hurt to get the the electric proof hard hat and the safety goggles if you're using power saws and stuff. There's a reason for that. You don't want to go blind, and so that's just personal safety. But I'm sorry, if I was up on the ISS in the thermosphere, I would be literally like the most like safety concerned person in terms of cordoning off every area, making
You wouldn't
sure
let me attack you in a ape suit?
Oh, well, there's always time for shenanigans, but of course. But you just look at the blatant disregard these people have for safety, and you could argue, well, the space station is very, it's a good structure, nothing's going to hurt it, but you'd still want to be just extremely overly cautious, because even a minor problem up there could be catastrophic to everyone, and really, like, honestly, if you've ever been in any sort of dangerous situation, and I can remember, and I think I've mentioned this before, but the most dangerous situation I've been in is we were hoisting up I think it was either a ton or a 2-ton giant granite block on top of these 2 columns at a school, and there was like 4 or 5 of us that had to stand under it, as it was slowly craned down and guided it perfectly flush into place. And it took us, from the time that we had it overhead, like an hour or so just to get that thing perfect. And that's because people take their lives pretty damn seriously. But it just seems like, all the footage from the International Space Station, that sort of, constant vigilance, that constant sort of always in the back of your mind fear, or the possibility of something going wrong, it just isn't there. And to me, from just looking at this from a psychological standpoint, just studying people, or I guess maybe that's anthropological, I don't know, whatever, but you know what I mean. They're just lacking that sort of safety concern that you employ that sort of stuff on any sort of job where you could potentially hurt your eye, or put a hammer your freaking thumb, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oops, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, absolutely true. So another thing, going back to this, I'm kind of going down this list, and I'm debating whether or not, Jaron, you know who I'm talking about on the flat Earth memes. But I have to say something about this. I'm debating on whether or not I even want to bring this guy up, and the reason for this is because I have noticed that when you bring up trolls' names or people that are just doing crazy crap altogether, for whatever reason their sub count goes up, and then he's already made the response to us that, oh well, as soon as you do your debunking of my video, I'm going to come up with this debunking of your debunking, and it's like, then it turns into this pissing contest, and it kind of reminds me of what was going on like between you and Red, and ultimately, like I've said before, I don't really see a whole lot of purpose in that.
Did somebody say pissing contest? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Oh, jeez. So I mean, I want to address these issues, some of them, but
well, maybe we'll just write them down and do them next week or something.
Well, I already have them written down, and so I can talk about them for sure, and we've already actually addressed a couple of them. But one of the things, number 25 on this list, was gravity is just a theory, and as it was pointed out, and I noticed that Antonio did a hangout with this other clown. Let's just put it that way. And
Antonio Montoya, you killed my prepare to die.
Yeah. Antonio Suvarats did this hangout with another guy who I think is very vile, and I don't really want to mention his name or bring any light to his channel, because this is exactly what these trolls live for. But what they were saying essentially is that theories were absolute scientific fact. It's the best that we have. Theories are fact. They're not theories. They're not conjecture. And that to me, that's so ridiculous. It's beyond belief. I mean, let's look up the definition of a theory. Okay.
Even a scientific theory, as they want to call it.
Yeah. Whoops. How did I get there?
Yeah, and I believe in some people's eyes it's synonymous with a law or an immutable fact, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and they seem to think, okay, so a supposition or a system of ideas intended to explain something, especially one based on general principles, independent to the thing to be explained. So let's actually go to dictionary.com.
Well, you can look right there where it says a set of principles based on. Let me just go back. But
okay. Well, it's saying. And then too, it says a proposed explanation whose status is still conjectural and subject to experimentation. Okay, but even in the first definition, a coherent group of tested general propositions commonly regarded as correct, but not saying proven as fact. So, and then what were you saying before on the last one here?
Well, it says a set of principles on which the practice of an activity is based. So if you're basing it that way, yes, okay. So everything about the universe and the way it all works is based off gravity. So, yeah, if you're going to go down that route, well, sure, yeah, gravity's proven because you need it to be true for all your other bullshit. As soon as you take a step back and realize, well, what if we erased gravity? Well, then the Earth's not even a ball anymore. So that's why they have to call it a fact. Because if it's not a fact, well, then the Earth might not be a ball.
Right, and in fact, it is a theory. Even here, it talks about gravity is most accurately described by the general theory of relativity. Again, proposed by Albert Einstein. Incorrect. Proposed by Albert Einstein's wife. And I can't stress that enough. Einstein was a clown who did nothing. He was nothing more than a Hollywood icon. He was not anywhere near as smart as people like Nikola Tesla or James Clerk Maxwell or anybody like that. He was simply a puppet that was, promoted by the elites.
Scroll down.
Anyway, okay.
If you read,
okay. Well, what I was going to say is even just recently, that whole so-called proof of gravity waves with the LIGO interferometer where they saw the dual black holes, really what that was, if you break it down in summary in just two quick words, they saw a blip on a chart, and they convinced themselves that it was gravity waves. That's all that was, and then they made a beautiful CGI image to prove it. But the point is if gravity is this known law as opposed to this very bizarre and peculiar theory, then why the big kerfluffle about it? What's the big deal? Why are they making that announcement that they've convinced themselves that this blip on a chart is a gravity wave from 3.1 billion years ago? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I can sum that up in 10 words, Morgal, how their whole LIGO thing was. And those 10 words are this. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Okay. Anyway, Jaron, what were you going to point out on this?
No, that was, I've always brought it up before, but just the line starting with that it's the weakest of the four fundamental forces, but then it talks about it being... how can somebody have a negligible influence on the behavior of subatomic particles, but it is the biggest thing on a macroscopic scale? So you're saying that gravity is dominant with huge things, but not with small things, and it makes up nothing with everyday matter. So it says, and plays no role in determining the internal properties of everyday matter. How the hell does that work? On the other hand, gravity is the dominant interaction at the macroscopic scale and is the cause for the formation, shape, and trajectory of astronomical bodies. It is responsible for various phenomena observed on Earth and throughout the universe. See how they get away with that? How is that a definition? It is responsible for various phenomena observed on Earth and throughout the universe. Basically saying, we're going to use this whenever we damn well please, and you better accept it. For example, it causes Earth and other planets to orbit the Sun, the Moon to orbit the Earth, the formation of tides, the formation of evolution of galaxies, stars, and the solar system. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and even Newton acknowledged that it was a theory when he came out with it, and as his theory of gravity, he fully acknowledged that, and it has never been proven anything other than that since then, until of course you want to consider LIGO's little announcement 2 months ago that they have just discovered gravity waves from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So it's silly, and I think we did a very good job in debunking that, and we're not the only ones that went through that and debunked it. I love Theoria Apophysis, Ken Wheeler's definition of that and debunking of that. And also, I tend to agree with what he says, as well as James Clerk Maxwell, as what we're perceiving as a gravitational effect is actually an electromagnetic effect that relates to the dielectric inertial plane that is resultant out of a magnetic field. That dielectric, God, I keep saying that, dielectric inertial plane is in fact, in my opinion, the circle of the Earth that we are inhabiting, and then we have the toroidal structures that are above it, and technically would be below it, and I think maybe the toroidal structures below it are representative by the tortoise and the elephants in Vedic cosmology. So just a thought on on my behalf, but and certainly not provable. I'm going to call it what it is, a theory or an idea.
I said this earlier on our little live feed that I don't even go as far as anymore to say gravity is fake, because too many people call what the action is of an item falling back to Earth, call that gravity. So, okay, if you want to call that gravity, then I will agree with you. Now, where I draw the line is anything outside of the Earth. Anything, what goes up must come down. I agree with you. Call it gravity. Drop a pen, call it gravity. It does not mean that the moon is falling towards the Earth. That's ridiculous. Who says that? Where are you going to just say that from? How are you going to say we go around the sun because of gravity? Can't say that. Where's your proof of that?
Well, see, the thing is, though, is that we really have to have a fundamental change even in the vernacular, because gravity itself has a lot of sort of underlying pre-programmed understandings behind the word. And, as tedious as this may sound, I think it is important that we come up with a different way to express a solution for...
Well, maybe point that out to people, that draw the line after you say, okay, you want to call gravity what causes things to fall on Earth. Great, you want to put a name to that? That's fine, that's gravity. Now, think of everything else that gravity must bring with it. None of it even makes sense. I mean, when the universe expanded, when the stellar, star formation happened, how did things fly away from gravity? Gravity is the attracting force. Everything should have exploded at the Big Bang and immediately clumped up into a giant ball. There's no reason for it to be flying out in the middle of nowhere. Who elected itself to be centers of gravity? How did centers of gravity happen? When the stellar nebula happened, or whatever happened at the start of our solar system, supposedly the sun collapsed on itself, or whatever gravity collapsed on itself, and then spit out all this matter. And then how did Mars say I'll be a center of gravity, and Neptune said I'll be one? It doesn't make any sense. It would have all conglomerated together, but they'll just skip over that.
Well, and see, that's what I mean by the term gravity is sort of like, and really you can interchange it with God.
Absolutely.
And same thing with energy. Anything that can't be explained in human terms, anything that we really don't understand, including the curvilinear apparent orbit of the celestial bodies, that's explained away by gravity. What goes up must come down is explained away by gravity. The so-called galaxies far off in the night sky are explained away by gravity, and yet there's problems with that. So even the theory of gravity needs to be explained away by dark matter, and so the list goes on and on. But that's why, again, I mean,
it's called dogma. Dogma, like everyone, they hate dogma for religion. It's your dogma. That's what scientific dogma is. That's the problem with it, is that everything that they now study and everything that they teach in schools is based upon lies. It's based upon false axioms. And from there, you're going to come up with crap and nonsense all you want. And that's the problem with people who don't understand about science. They give me such a hard time and say, oh, but chemistry is true. You know what? Chemistry is true as long as the sun is 93 million miles away. All of a sudden, if that gets closer, or it changes everything. Everything that we base things on right now is based off of faulty axioms. Yeah, can we make things work? Sure. Yeah, does chemical reactions work? Yeah, but we're missing a whole entire plate full of things that we should be discovering, and that's why none of us can figure out what the hell Tesla knew, because it's been covered up with nonsense science. We were taught it all as kids, so we're all confused. It's impossible for us to even fathom things the way that they thought. And believe me, if there was any books written in 17, 18, 1900 about this, they've been burned. They've been hidden. They may leave a couple out, but again, Robotham's book gets left out, maybe on purpose. Some of those things to me just seem like they're a little too easy. If this is the deception we say it is, I think that they're hiding the ultimate truth. Somebody wrote me an email yesterday talking about, hey, I know you keep talking about them building stuff under the earth, but they allow that. It seems like it comes up a lot. Like, do you think that they're building stuff in the oceans? And and things like that are interesting to me, because I start to think, we don't hear shit about the oceans, and NASA is always training in the water, and NASA is always training for all fixing things in the water. So you start to hear things like that, and I just think whatever they're hiding, they're really hiding well, not just kind of putting it out there for everybody.
Well, and in terms of Zetetic and Robotham, I certainly don't agree with that author on every point. But the reason I think it's such an important book is to prove, at least to those who claim that this debate was settled 500 years ago. I mean, that book right there is pretty good proof that assertion is incorrect. Now, the other reason I like the book is because there's a lot of very basic, fundamental, repeatable observations that really anyone can make that, to me, are very good disproofs of the heliocentric model and very good proofs and
That's a good
arguments
point.
that were.
And one of the things that he did that a lot of other guys didn't do is he spoke. And when you speak out in public, you're securing at least that part of your what do you call it? I don't know, your remembrance or whatever. You're at least making sure that can't go away. When you just write a book, it's easy for them to get rid of the book. But when he spoke a lot. He spoke at a lot of town hall meetings and actually got out there. So he started showing up in newspapers and things that they can't go back and actually correct. So, I agree with you on that. I do think that the book is filled with stuff that we were able to test and verify. The only thing I think in that whole book that has still got me a little bit lost is this whole explanation of the Southern Stars. But I think he was on the right track.
Yeah, and again, I don't agree with him on a number of issues, but that isn't to say that the majority of the observations and the measurements and really repeatable experiments and a lot of the debunkings that he did in terms of globe Earth proofs was just so well done. There's no point in reinventing the wheel because most of that stuff I can point to and totally agree. Now, when he gets into things like reflection of the moon or even some of the more biblical stuff, that's not really my cup of tea per se. But as a whole, it is a scientific, objective book full of observations and repeatable experiments. So in that regard, it's at least an important landmark to show people that, this was not settled back at, 500 or 1,000 years ago. This was debated throughout history, and it just seems as if the heliocentric model somehow won out because there was, or appears that there was, some type of a nefarious agenda to trick people into thinking that we live on a globe at some point. Now, the main reason that I think that the main motive for this is to really just keep us from wondering what's beyond. Because if what's beyond is just, Antarctica, and beyond that is just, an ocean on the other side of the world, then it's just pointless. It turns the whole thing into a pointless sort of never-ending rat's maze, if you will. Whereas if you start looking at different flat Earth models, there's more possibility than just Antarctica being, a little dead end at the bottom of the sphere. And so in that regard, there was this motive, even back in 1865. That's another thing, too, because I often find myself wondering, how long has this lie been pushed as factual? And it seems that at least in, when Dr. Robotham was growing up, the globe Earth was being taught as factual. And you see other works, Ptolemy in 100 AD was using a geocentric model. So, there's room for debate here. And I think one thing that you've talked a lot about, Jaron, is that history is not as concrete as we necessarily think. I mean, it seems as if history is very much malleable, especially when it is, well, of course, always written by the winners, right?
Absolutely. No, I think history is nowhere near cemented at all.
Yeah, absolutely true. So, all right, so I kind of want to take a slight detour from this, John, and we've been talking about this particular subject for the past couple weeks, and I don't know how much you know about it yet, but I'm going to kind of bring you up to speed about something that Brian Mullen and also Crow 777 both announced, and that's basically
seen that. I've also
that they have a belief now that the mesosphere, as he's putting right up here, is actually, or this area of space, is actually water. He has come straight out and asserted it. Crow has also made the very same assertion. He's basically saying that roughly here it's in the mesosphere that he thinks this is happening. So we will put that there. And then Crow also makes the same announcement I'll play this real
So
quick.
I have spent years now looking at the lunar wave footage, looking at space, realizing that nobody is going to the moon, nobody is going above what we call low Earth orbit. So I'm here to tell you that I have come to the point of looking at the encoded memes, movies, and everything else, and I believe space is very likely liquid or water.
Okay, so there we have it. So we have the two of them basically coming out with that. I started looking at his information about the lunar wave and kind of trying to see it in the perspective of, that the lunar structure, whatever it is, whether it's crystalline or whatever, that wave that seems to go across it looks like very much like it is a very high viscosity type of water. And then, ironically, somebody pulls up and sends me this video, which I had actually seen before, but I kind of glazed it over. But he wrote this book about it. He's a professor of bioengineering at the University of Washington, Gerald Pollack, and it's interesting because he has come out with this book that's describing water in a fourth phase, which is kind of a high viscosity, gelatinous type of water.
Sure.
And that blew my mind.
Yeah, that's what I was. That was actually what I was going to ask. And in terms of water, what Brian Mullen's saying, and I've watched basically all his stuff, so I am familiar with Brian Mullen. I like his work. But are we necessarily talking about like dense liquid water, or some form of water vapor, or something even more exotic, like you're alluding to?
Well, I think that it's all probably a structure of water. At least I'm going to kind of go with that assumption. But this particular state of water, the fourth phase of water that he's talking about that it is very prevalent in our bodies, obviously, and when we're born, our water level in our body is nearly close to 90%, and of course, as we grow old, it depletes down to around 60%. And he says this particular type of water is a highly viscous, almost like a gelatinous type of water that's not necessarily on the verge of freezing, even though that is one good way to describe it. But it's like a heavy type of water that this fourth phase actually occurs very naturally, especially in our body. And all I could think of is
what's interesting? It's interesting, and I'm so sorry to interrupt, but just imagine for a second that all of the helium and all of the lighter gases that raise up to that level essentially don't freeze, but they get so dense and cold that they form into a liquid. And so maybe it's not H2O, but maybe it's some form of liquid hydrogen or liquid helium or something along those lines.
Right. That has some sort of impurity to it that would actually change the characteristics. So it doesn't necessarily have to be absolutely pure H2O. There could be some other chemical in it. For example, when we were talking about the old water trick that NASA does, where they're basically bouncing around a bubble of water, well, somebody sent me from a magician's site how you can actually make this thin membrane that will give you the same general appearance. And you put in a couple drops of this chemical, and I can't remember what it was, I'll have to dig up the video, and then boil it and let it settle, and then basically it forms this kind of cellular film that you can encase water in, and it looks like it's just this water bubble that's floating around in space, and it's very likely what NASA is using, something like that when they're doing their little tricks, with water and whatnot, if it's not entirely CGI. But we also have to keep in mind that NASA has much more than just CGI and stop motion stuff like that to fool our minds. We have the general magician's tricks that have been around for centuries, where they basically create an illusion by sleight of hand or some other methodology. There was a trick that I used to do, and it absolutely convinced people. They thought I was possessed or something. It's funny, and I'll let you in on this little secret. But if you take a little bit of a chemical, mercury HgCl2, mercury bichloride, okay? And if you touch it on your fingers and you take a piece of aluminum foil and you fold it up, just the chemical reaction with the mercury bichloride, the HgCl2, on your fingers will literally cause that foil to burn up. And so what I used to do, especially back in the day, is I would do that in, I did a little bartending back in the day, and this is one of the favorite tricks I used to like to pull. I'd say, hey, give me that foil off your cigarette package, and they would, and then I'd fold it up and I'd put it in their hand, and it would burn up right in their hand. And they're like, holy crap, how would you do that? I'm like, oh, I'm just focusing, It's just bullshit like that you can get away with, whereas if you don't know the secret behind the trick, you look like you're really pulling off some magic trick, and there's a lot of people that really believe that that could actually be done. So it's pretty funny. But anyway,
growing up in Florida, all of us little brats had pools, and so we used to take like a bunch of aluminum foil and fold it up really, really small, and then stick it in one of the bottles of almost empty, I guess it was either muriatic acid or something like that, and shake it up real good, and then run away because the damn thing would explode. So that was always a lot of fun.
Yeah. So anyway, but NASA definitely has that in their bag of tricks to say, but we're kind of getting away from the point here. But so the whole thing is I started looking at space as, okay, well, what if it is water? And then the more I started thinking about it, and we talked about this on Nathan's show, it's like, you have to wonder, maybe NASA found a way to get through that membrane, of the firmament itself. And it's possible that maybe if they're up there and they're exploring around in this darkness, because you don't see any stars or anything like up there, that they're actually in this void. And if it truly is a water medium, maybe, and I'm not saying this by any means is true, but maybe that's where the water leakage from the astronaut's helmet came in, and that's why they had to put snorkels in.
Yeah,
of course, I don't really understand.
One of the regular panel members on the show that I've been doing has sort of been thinking along the lines. He's a military man, and his whole sort of point of view on this is that NASA is a military outfit. They're sort of an arm of the U.S. military.
Definitely.
And so they're going to train for the environments in which they're going to operate in, and so that could very easily mean that they're going to do all of their stuff and fake it in a pool. But he's also theorized, much like you just sort of mentioned, that perhaps they have found a way to penetrate into this sort of liquid area, and maybe they are doing stuff up there. But my line of thought on this is Occam's razor. It's much easier, much more cost effective, and just as realistic to fake it. So why why go the country mile, right?
You also used to be a follower of Richard Hoagland, and you remember how he used to always talk about, oh, well, they're just doing all this other stuff to cover up for the super secret space program, right?
Well, I wouldn't say I was a follower of Richard Hoagland. What I would say is that I watched some of his stuff, and it was very intriguing, and I started getting into, I think it was like some alleged footage that he had of a destroyed moon of Europa or something like that was part of the asteroid belt, and some of the stuff that he was saying was very sensational, and I was like, that's interesting. But then as I got to watch more of his stuff, I was like, I sort of got the impression, you know what, this guy's kind of a douche. No offense or anything, just that was my line of thinking, and I just started seeing more and more. It's almost like once you realize, and this is just me, but like once you realize Alex Jones is very disingenuous and he's just sort of slimy, that you just sort of like see right through them from that point forward. There's almost no going back.
Oh yeah,
that was sort of with Kent Hoagland,
Yeah, but I mean, and what you're talking about was the Iapetus moon, which looked a lot like the Death Star, right? And then, and of course, he covered that in detail, and I have to admit, I bought into that hook, line, and sinker also, because then all of a sudden somebody dug up these little bitty things that look like little mini Iapetuses or mini Death Stars, right? And he's showing all these anomalies that he's claiming, well, this is absolutely an artificial structure. It looks like an ancient Death Star, and kind of went off on that tangent. But yes, I agree.
Here's a picture of the dome on the moon. See the dome on the moon? See?
Yeah, that too, the dome on the moon. But and like you, I have discovered since then that Richard C. Hoagland is nothing but pure disinformation, and he's full of crap. And he is definitely one of them, the propagators of this lie. So. But I'm just saying that, I'm trying to at least see a little bit from the NASA side. Maybe if it's liquid, then maybe they figured out how to get into that zone. Of course, a few weeks back, I was also hypothesizing that they found, magnetically possibly this region, that would be akin to what some of the researchers are calling the flip ring in the magnetic model, where you can actually access it through like a kind of a side access, and that maybe that they were getting equipment up there in this zone of equilibrium where gravity and weightlessness kind of, are at an equilibrium part, so things could float around. It was just an idea that I was throwing around, and so.
Yeah, it's possible, and just humoring this for a second, just suppose that it is like these ultralight gases that are sort of coalescing and at these upper edges of the atmosphere, whatever that layer is. Just suppose for a second that that is something like helium or hydrogen. In a liquid form, that would be like super duper duper cold, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, it would be if it was like liquid hydrogen. It would be,
Yeah.
way down there. Not at absolute zero, but not too far from it. But yeah, so yeah, that's entirely possible that it is, space, and who knows what the temperature is. And again, if you add a little bit of alcohol to water, that lowers the freezing point considerably. So, not saying that it necessarily is pure water or that it would take on all of its characteristics or behaviors, but I guess it would be more proper to say, rather than water, than just simply to say a liquid medium of some sort.
Yeah.
That would kind
Yeah.
of give us that impression. And so I was kind of curious what you thought about that, because to me, the more I think about it, the more plausible that actually sounds. That the Bible was quite correct in being literal of separating the waters from above from the waters below. Now, I had always looked at it before like, there was some sort of a chamber in between the two firmaments that was like vacuum, and that's where the sun and the moon were residing. But if you think about it, and you think about sonoluminescence and the way that these stars in a jar are produced by basically a cymatic process that creates wave pressure in the water itself, and then it erupts in kind of this burst of photons. So we have this star in a jar phenomenon, and who's to say that couldn't be scaled up? I mean, the thing I think that really kept me away from going there, because you don't tend to think of a flaming ball like the sun being immersed in water. That's just kind of counterintuitive, but you think about it again, it's like, why not? And that would certainly explain some of the visual phenomenon that we see as far as the lunar wave and any other little strange anomalies of things floating around out in space. So I think it's a great idea. I'm sorry, Jaron, go ahead.
And water being such a great conductor.
Yeah, absolutely is. Well, especially when it's saline, and here's something that most people don't know about water, but water in its purest form, like when it's distilled, is actually an excellent insulator. It's not a conductor. It's only when you add impurities to it, and specifically saline or salt, then it becomes a very good conductor, and it also becomes just that much more diamagnetic, where it's going to be influenced by any magnetic characteristic that's being put off by the sun or the moon. It's not gravity that's causing these quote-unquote tides necessarily below, but a diamagnetic property that is very effective on salt water. And by that, by the way, another one of these points that he talks about is, a lot of people say, well, lakes don't have tides. And it's like, yeah, they do, but it's extremely minute. And the reason for that is because most lakes are freshwater. Not all of them, but most of them are freshwater, and they have a very, very teeny tiny variance, I mean like millimeters in tide change, unlike the oceans, which of course are highly saline and would be much more affected by a diamagnetic or magnetic source. That would tend to cause these tides, especially if you think about the flat Earth model, where the sun is going around in circles in between the Tropic of Capricorn and Cancer, and then we see from those paths, we see the spin-offs of what they're calling the Coriolis effects, and I suppose you could call it that if you want to, but it's really more of a diamagnetic effect than a Coriolis effect from any type of Earth spinning. So,
Yeah.
so what do you think about that, John? I mean, have you thought about that, space in terms of being a liquid
Well,
medium? I think it's a fantastic, thought.
yeah, I've thought about it a lot, and if we're going to sort of stick to the idea, and this is something that I really do adhere to in terms of density and buoyancy being responsible for a lot of what we attribute to gravity. I always do make the caveat that in order for density and buoyancy to work, still need to have a tendency for down to be down and up to be up. And what I tend to look at this as density as a frequency. So, you've got the lower density, ground, say, resonating at a lower frequency than, say, helium. And helium, whether it's in a balloon or in a free gas that's going to spread out, eventually that helium, those molecules, are going to make their way well above all of the denser air and hydrogen as well. And so you're going to have these different layers of different types of gases assorted by their relative densities. And I certainly have thought about specific areas well above the face of the Earth, and I hate to use the word sphere, like magnetosphere or troposphere, but I'll just say plane. In one of these planes above the Earth, I could certainly see something like helium or hydrogen or these very light gases meeting certain conditions in terms of temperature, or even, it may have something to do with electromagnetism that we're not aware of. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's definitely possible. Now, I have seen the lunar wave footage, and it definitely appears as if there's some sort of a wave medium. But, to me, that could be anywhere in between our eye and the moon, and it isn't necessarily indicative of liquid, up there in that area. But I certainly won't rule it out. I think that it's highly plausible that these ultralight, helium, hydrogen, and that sort of thing, these ultralight elements finding their way up to sort of a comfort zone where you may have sort of an inversion in terms of those ultralight gases somehow meeting the conditions to become liquid. And I could even see under certain circumstances that liquid freezing. And that could be, akin to or related to perhaps the last ice age, if such a thing occurred. So yeah, there's lots of possibilities. I usually don't tend to rule anything out, and it is a lot of fun to theorize about that sort of thing, but we really just need more evidence, more high altitude observations, and nothing from NASA. We really need to stop listening to those guys because they're a bunch of liars.
Right. Yeah, boy, is that the truth. Well, and and I theorize this only because of the evidence, essentially, that we have recently uncovered. A lot of this has to do with this particular rocket that went up the Amateur, and we actually covered this on one episode a long time ago about it. But I kind of re-highlighted it because when the Amateur rocket gets up to a certain place, there's two things that are very noticeable to me, and I don't know where it is exactly in this, but it basically is. I'm sorry, Jaron, did you say something?
Nope.
Oh, okay. Anyway, that's my own feedback I'm getting. Basically, it has a appearance. There's something that's kind of on the side of the rocket that looks like it's reacting to a very strong magnetic field, and that was the thing that I pointed out the very first time we covered this footage. But the other thing that's really amazing is not only does the rocket stop spinning, and of course we know their explanation for that is the yo-yo despin mechanism that we talked about, but also it seems like it just loses all of its forward momentum just instantly, and at that very instant when you're listening to the audio, it sounds like something underwater. It goes yeah. And everything from that point forward sounds very much like it's underwater. So we have the behavior then of the rocket appearing to hit something that would be like gel structure. Obviously it's not hitting anything solid because it would have disintegrated the rocket itself at that speed. But whatever it was had enough of a gelatin or a viscous enough property that it slowed that rocket down really quick, and in doing so it gave sound effects very much like it was underwater. And then beyond that, after the D-spin, the yo-yo D-spin mechanism had fired, and they dropped away the primary engine part, the acceleration part of the rocket, it didn't drop away at any speed that would be commensurate with you know, what it should be drawn down at the speed of gravity. It looked like it just kind of floated down through some other mechanism. Now, again, this was something that was completely unexpected and, you know, completely reevaluated. But I think all of a sudden now, between that observation, the observation of the lunar wave, you know, the biblical scripture talking about, you know, the dividing of the waters with the firmament, all of those things coming together, here we are. We're starting to build another preponderance of evidence for the idea that space just might be liquid. And that opens up a whole nother, you know, line of thought on this whole flat Earth conundrum about, you know, our true reality. And I think it's amazing.
Or it could even just be a thin layer of liquid, or it could be different densities of liquid as you go higher up. Or it could be, you know, something else that appears to be a liquid. But yeah, I mean, I agree. There may be something to it, and you know, with the biblical sort of descriptions of that, I think it's important to go back to the original text and sort of try to discern, you know, what the actual original words were used. Not to be nitpicky, just to go to the source of the message. Sometimes I've found that is very enlightening, and sometimes it's, you know, it confirms what we already know. But yeah, definitely very interesting. And you know, one thing that I always sort of assumed growing up, I always, as a globe earther, I assumed that space, you know, once you go beyond the tropoplane or troposphere and above, I assumed that it, you know, once you get into space, it would be extremely cold, just simply due to the physical definition of heat, which is, you know, essentially the excitement of lots of different atoms sort of interacting and bouncing off of one another. That's sort of the, you know, the average description of heat. And I just sort of assumed that, you know, up in space it would be very cold. But, you know, studying this topic further and further in flat Earth terms, it just really makes you wonder, you know, if there is a layer of liquid up there, I'd be hard-pressed to think that it's water, because most water is cycled through the typical, you know, condensation and you know, evaporation, condensation, precipitation cycle. I'd really like to know what sort of influences would cause these waters to go so high, you know, these vapors to go so high into the air. But I could certainly see other sorts of gases, like I said, helium or hydrogen, doing something similar. And I think it would be very interesting to find evidence of liquid hydrogen or helium at that level. And I wonder if that has something to do with those observations of the I'm now famous for saying the plasma tubes in the lower magnetosphere.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And those plasma tubes in the lower magnetosphere that you're describing are what I have described as the magnetic lines of flux emanating centripetally and centrifugally from the core of the magnet poles. You know, whether the pole is actually Mount Meru at the center of the flat Earth, and the other pole being like the North Star, whatever, or however you want to kind of reconfigure that model. But yeah, so that's kind of what I'm looking at. And so let me see if I can get a little sound on this. I don't know this one too well, but let's see if we can hear what is happening here. Okay, so
very slowly.
Now that sound that it's making to me sounds just like if you've ever been sitting in a bathtub and you kind of plug your nose and you go underwater and you listen. That is exactly the sound that I hear. Or even in a swimming pool, you can hear this, you know, well, it has a very distinct sound to it. And also you notice that, you know, how fast it stopped, you know, its forward progress. Now let's continue watching this and watch. You can see along here that you've got these splinters, it looks like, of possibly, you know, the metallic outer casing or whatever. But look at the pattern they're taking. I don't know how well you can see this over the feed, but they are propping up just like iron ore would be in the presence of a magnetic field. The experiment that we all did in school a long time ago. So again, we're going to watch this, and then we're going to watch it eject its propulsion stage below this, but then watch how it falls away. It's amazing. Very slow, and it'll come around here again, and it doesn't make any sense that everything has slowed down to that slow motion like that, unless of course it was possibly suspended in sort of some sort of liquid medium. So, but yeah, I just think that is so absolutely amazing that this type of evidence is coming forward, and I hope that we can get some more type of footage like this. Maybe somebody launching another rocket like that. Although by the looks of it, that thing could not have been cheap. I can only imagine. We're doing a balloon experiment that we're getting ready to launch, and it is so easy to tie up $750 to $1,000 in a balloon. It's ridiculous. So I can only imagine how many thousands of dollars these people actually tied up in this rocket. But wow, it really, in a lot of ways, has provided some amazing information for us.
Well, and a couple things I would say real quick is as far as I could tell, the initial sound where you hear that sort of like the first sort of bang, from what I gathered, that's supposed to be those de-spinning, anti-spin magnetic contraption or whatever. But then another thing too, and again, I'm just sort of playing devil's advocate here, but if there was a liquid medium that it traversed through, wouldn't you expect to see some sort of ocular distortion of the ground once you got through it? Or,
well, possibly yes, or not necessarily distortion so much as it could possibly, be an explanation for magnification. Now, we've talked about atmospheric lensing and quote-unquote gravitational lensing, but if you think about it, if you take a whole bunch of water and you fill up a container of glass with it, it will have effects where it will tend to magnify things. It will also have the counter magnification type effect where it'll make things look further away, depending on, I guess, the refraction of light, through the medium itself. So all of those things could entirely be met. And also, another thing that to me it explains very well is if the sun and the moon are actually up there in this liquid medium, then by the very nature of what we know by refraction, by everyday examples, by putting a straw inside of a glass and watching it bend down, we've constantly asked the question of, well, how come you don't see that much of a difference in the size of the sun, from when it's rising on the horizon till it passes overhead? Now, I would say that you actually do see a relatively substantial amount of size. However, in going with that and saying, okay, well, you could also look at it this way. If the sun is in liquid and it's just coming around, over the horizon or around the corner, if you will, within visual range, it could be at the size that we're seeing it due to the magnification through the liquid medium that it could be suspended in. And as it gets closer, we're then viewing the sun through less of that liquid medium, which would have less of a magnetic effect. So it could, kind of potentially be keeping an equilibrium of size from the time that we're perceiving it as sunrise or sunset, to the time that it's going more or less directly overhead. And again, this would be more in line with atmospheric lensing, because I made that hypothesis, I think like on our very first episode of GlobeBusters, where, I thought that it was because of the atmosphere that the sun remained fairly much the same size, because there was more atmosphere back then, or back between the sun at sunrise point, as compared to it being directly overhead. The same could be said for water. So that's would be my answer to that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me also if there is some sort of a liquid up there, whether it's just running in a plane like a layer or whether it's following some sort of a dome shape pattern. I mean, that's probably up for debate, but I could see that liquid medium, whatever that liquid is, as being sort of a really excellent sort of medium to propagate electromagnetic waves and light waves and that sort of thing.
Yeah, very much so. So, just throwing ideas out there, for people's consideration. And these are, these may or may not be part of, what I'm calling our preponderance of evidence. This is actually more of a speculation, but as I said before, and I think we're all in agreement, in order to solve this mystery, we've got to think outside of the box. We've got to stop confining ourselves to the standard models and the standard science that NASA has given us and start looking at some of this other obvious stuff.
So here's this for an idea. You tell me if I'm out in left field. So I'm just thinking about everything you guys are talking about, and if you look at them spraying the air, and maybe they're hurting our connection with the ether, with the infinite, kind of hurting that whole thing. And then if you think about it, they've constructed shoes. We have to wear shoes all the time, and our houses are up on foundations. I'm just wondering has anyone ever thought about getting a connection with the earth itself, going barefoot out with the earth? If there's any kind of energy running through that, wouldn't that be the best way to get connected to it?
I read an article pretty recently within the last few months that most Americans, especially those that live in cities, but most Americans have not had their feet touch the ground, literally, like not talking about shoes touching concrete or maybe shoes touching the Central Park, but it's something ridiculous like 90% of Americans like have zero contact with nature, literally to the point to where their feet haven't made contact with the earth in like years, like most people. Yep. Yeah.
And most people don't understand how really important that is, because Jaron, you're right. It is about grounding yourself to the earth. It's good to take your shoes off, go outside, walk around in the dirt, and notice how you feel. And if you are attuned to yourself in any way, shape, or form, you will notice that there is a change in the way that you feel. It also makes sense from an electrical engineering point of view to be grounded to the very earth that you're standing on, because then you are no longer really subject to the static influences that are coming from like friction in the air or whatever. So, I mean, there's a multitude of reasons to do this, and I think, that's why hippies, always tend to go around barefoot, not because necessarily they don't like shoes, but they seem to understand that.
Throw my shoes away.
No, it's funny because summers in Florida, I used to go to the beach a lot, and so I would just go around barefoot a lot because, you can park on Daytona Beach, and then...
Chernoki, that's what you mean.
Yeah, we walked to 7-Eleven, whoops, forgot my shoes, so I wound up with like pretty darn formidable, I've since lost my formidable I guess it's, calluses, whatever. Yeah, calluses on my feet, but yeah, I got to the point where I could essentially, walk anywhere with bare feet, and, I think there may be something to it. I think I felt more grounded when I went barefoot, so, maybe there's something to it, but, people protect themselves from the sun. I've even recently run into some research that suggests that sunscreen may be what's causing a lot of the melanomas as opposed to the sun itself. And, the sun, just sitting out in the sun for a couple hours a day, you absorb a lot of vitamin A, vitamin D. So there really is a lot to us being sort of part of or one with the earth. And yeah, a lot of civilization or scientism has led us sort of away from nature, and I think, yeah, there is a big disconnect between us and the physical earth, and therefore, by extension, there's a disconnect between us and the, sort of maybe more spiritual side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're kind of surrounded in this soup, this electromagnetic soup, and I've talked about this before, where we have so much electromagnetic emission around us that it's almost impossible that it would not be interfering with our alpha, beta, delta waves in our brain. both on a harmonic and a subharmonic level. I talked about how the power frequencies in the UK are like 50 hertz, 50 cycles per second, where in America they're 60 hertz, 60 cycles per second. And of course, the subharmonics of those are down in the, I believe it's the delta range, the beta and delta range of our brain function. You also have the resonance of the Earth, the Schumann resonance, which is about 7 hertz. So all of these things are causing this kind of interference to our brain, both through harmonics, subharmonics, resultant frequencies, heterodyning, all this stuff. And I think I told you guys, or maybe Jaren this morning, that when you guys were on doing your chat over on Jaren's channel, I had decided the last few nights to just turn off my cell phone and see if I slept any better. And I did. I do. It's amazing how much better I'm actually sleeping with the cell phone off.
Oh, dude, turn off the router, turn off the PCs,
everything.
The laptops, everything, and literally I sleep through the night. If I leave that stuff on, I wake up like 15 times during the night, seriously.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm finding too. And another thing is if you have power wires that are adjacent to like the head of your bed, if you have anything plugged into them, disconnect it so that it's not drawing current, because it's when you're drawing current through those power wires that you generate a magnetic field around them, and that magnetic field will permeate the area where your brain is at, and it will kind of start overloading it with these electromagnetic fields, which will disturb REM sleep, and it causes a whole host of problems, not the least of which can turn very physical into physical ailments. So yeah, it's absolutely amazing that we are so inundated with this wireless technology, and we may think it's the greatest thing in the world, and of course I've made a career out of it as an electrical engineer, but the more I study it, the more I realize what this spurious radiation is doing to our minds. It's literally disconnecting us from not only the Earth, but also the intuition, the telepathy that should naturally be occurring between humans. There's so many things that are just going on interference-wise, and that's why I've noticed that when there's a power outage, especially a large power outage, I will sit back and actually take notice of how serene and peaceful things actually get. Most people don't even think about it. They're scrambling around, looking around the neighborhood, or looking for a flashlight or whatever. But I always take that opportunity to think, wow, we've just lost a huge amount of electromagnetic radiation by virtue of the power being cut off through, throughout the entire neighborhood, or maybe a large portion of the city. And it is amazing.
And everything the powers that be want to do is get you with every new toy, and get this new Alexa thing you can talk to, and get this new TV, and get this radio, and get satellite TV, and get satellite radio, and it's just nonstop a barrage of, you need this toaster oven, you need this microwave oven, you need this, it's just everything. They want your entire house filled up with electronics.
Yep, and all of our houses are filled up with electronics. I mean, I look around my house, and it's just stunning how many things are emitting RF radiation, whether it's, I have like 6 computers or 7 computers in the house. All of them are, clocking. They have RF emanating from them. I have the wireless. I have the wireless phones. I have our cell phones. And everybody has this stuff, and it's absolutely amazing. We're literally inundated with this RF electromagnetic radiation, and it may be wonderful for the technology, but it's also wonderful technology for cutting us off from the very womb of the Earth, and our Mother Earth that we depend on so very much. And it's also cutting us off from each other. And that's really kind of a conundrum, because most people don't want to give up their technology. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to give it up. I like doing these shows, and the fact that I've got this computer technology that makes it possible for me to be talking to Jaren in California and John in, you're in North Carolina, right, John?
South Kakalaka.
South Carolina, damn it. I always get that backwards. South Kakalaka.
That's all right. Same thing. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, it's all the same. Whatever. But I mean, it's unfortunate because it's the tech.
I was going to say it's a shame too because, you know, scientism has people convinced that we as people are very much like robotic and not anything sort of spiritual, certainly not electromagnetic. But when you actually start to study the human anatomy and how our brain function works and how like our reaction to stimuli works, it is all very much an electromagnetic system. And so it's very naive for people to sort of poo-poo this as a conspiracy theory because, you know, even our smart meters for the electricity, the waters, even the water company even uses smart meters. Then you've got your router, your cell phone. All of these different things are operating on all sorts of different bandwidths of radio frequency waves, but that certainly has an effect on our subconscious. I mean, you may not feel physical heat from it, which is how how they regulate it, whether RF waves are dangerous or not. But really, no testing has ever been done long term to exposure to all these different frequencies constantly barraging us. And I think that it really has a detrimental effect on, personally, I found sleep for sure. But I think maybe even our ability to focus, concentrate, all sorts of different things that could be affected by sort of perturbances in our normal electromagnetic function as people.
Absolutely, yeah. And the biggest magnet we have in our body is our heart. And to even get the idea that being immersed in this electromagnetic soup would not have some sort of effect on our heart rhythms, arrhythmia or anything like that, would be ludicrous, especially if you understand anything about electronics or electrical circuits. We are electrical beings. In fact, it is electrical universe. Everything is a product of electricity, of the electromagnetism that comes from it, and also the electricity that is resultant out of electromagnetism. They are two sides of the same coin. They're not exactly the same thing, but they are inexorably linked together, and it's the very things that are making life function that they are corrupting and bringing into mass production to not only dumb us down, but to disconnect us from our natural environment, which ultimately is kind of a slow kill mechanism. So it's pretty crazy. It really is when you think about it. But it's the reality that we live in. And again, I've said before, we can't solve this conundrum that we're in by any type of vote, by any type of war, or anything like that. We simply have got to become aware that this is what's happening. We have to become aware of how we are being affected. We have to become aware of how we are being manipulated. And once we are aware, then and our vibration has risen above that, we simply don't play that game anymore. We seek other alternatives that are not so detrimental to ourselves in our technologies, and we start pursuing a completely different course in life.
Yeah, I think the one thing that worries me about that more than anything is that you've got 3.5 million kids graduating from high school every year. So I think this is where NASA and these guys are so brave and don't care anymore, because you've got 3.5 million drones popping out every single year. I mean, how are we going to contact 3.5 million people every year to keep that counterbalanced? You may say you alert 100,000, 500,000. Well, they know their numbers are growing, and that's all they bank off of. So, that's where I struggle, is I'm constantly trying to do something that will kind of, hit something big somehow, some way, because, they're just playing the numbers game.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that, all goes back to, this kind of this critical 100th monkey point. You're right. There's a lot more people that are graduated that are, full products of the indoctrination system than we're reaching here on YouTube. But the point is because this movement of the flat Earth is growing, as well as the truth movement in general, or simply, shall I say, the realization that something is terribly wrong here on good old plain Earth. I think that the more people understand that, whether or not they believe in flat Earth or not, or whether or not they understand that cell phones fry your brain or not, or whatever, they are getting the idea, they're understanding intuitively, and this is coming from this this 100th monkey type effect, where we're all accessing this akashic record or whatever, however you want to look at it. But it's kind of creeping into our consciousness, as well as it's a natural process, it's a natural evolution to have consciousness go in cyclical fields as well. We are coming out of a very low area of consciousness and evolving into a little bit higher area of consciousness, and with it comes this understanding, this feeling, this knowledge that we need to trust this intuition that's inbred in all of us. And we don't have to understand all the workings of it to know that something's wrong and something's got to change. And then it's at that point where that intuition will kind of take over and lead us into a wider range of information that will feed that emptiness that we're feeling inside, that sense that something's wrong, and we will be driven intuitively to seek out what it is. And I think this is our biggest advantage.
One thing I would say too, and sort of agreement with your point, is that more and more frequently, and maybe I could poll you guys and see if you've sort of experienced anything similar, but I've just found it more and more frequent that people are contacting me a lot of time by phone, sometimes by email if I can catch it, that they're waking up to this a lot more easily than they were, say, 6 months or a year ago. And I think that this is a natural progression of, we started out with arguments that made sense to us, and then of course there's a gazillion counter arguments, but as a whole, I think, like, you, Jaron, Bob, there's a lot of different people doing a lot of good work on this that are sort of by default answering or retorting or debunking all of these so-called globe earth proofs. And I just think it's getting easier and easier for people to sort of understand and see this, because yes, there is a lot more sort of quality work going around. On the other hand, there is a lot of poor quality, sort of bad information going around, I think, as well. But what do you guys think? I mean, have you also noticed, like, more and more people saying, hey man, I started looking at this 4 days ago, and I'm all over it. This is awesome. Or is it just me?
No, absolutely. I've seen it a lot. In fact, I've been trying to teach myself, and just like you were saying, John, earlier, about not being able to get so much to your emails and messages. As much as I want to do that, I've kind of realized that it's better if I just kind of hunker down and make videos, and just I think that's the best way. I mean, nobody that's emailed me and we've gone back and forth in a conversation has ever said, well, thanks to your conversation and your back and forth with me for the last 6 or 7 emails, now I believe. I don't get emails like that. It ends up being a back and forth between somebody who is an animate believer of the science world, and I'm trying to explain to them why what they believe is just a belief. It's not true. It's not. And then I kind of get lost in this, and I think I'm doing good, but I'm not really putting my my time or my effort in the right direction. And so I need to start doing too.
Because only that one person is ever going to read that. Whereas if you were to, and I've done this a couple times now, whereas if you take that response, and whether it's sort of a reply to a dissenter or whether it's an explanation to somebody with a legitimate question, just sort of making a video about that specific point, because that specific point is going to come up, 150 million times, and there's no sense in trying to type that out. So that's sort of the beauty of YouTube, is you can make a video about it, and hopefully, eventually somebody will stumble on it and it'll answer that particular question. But there's just so many different things involved, it's almost impossible to categorize. And keeping in mind, we're only, or at least me personally, I'm only a year into this. Look how long it took 9/11 to catch on, like 15 years almost, to catch on to the mainstream. And part of me thinks that that's a diversion away from flat Earth, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, you're right about that, John. Also, I would like to say that, in response to Jaron's question, I think that, yes, a lot of people are waking up and seeing this, or I guess you said that, John, but also, to be fair, it kind of goes back to, I've been immersed in this deeply, and that's all I see is the other side of the coin. So, it's kind of a little bit of a skewed viewpoint there. I mean, if you look at analytics and, like searches for flat Earth or searches on 9/11, yes, there's definitely upticking trends that are showing a definite increased interest in this, and that's very encouraging. But it's really kind of unfair to ask somebody that is knee-deep in the middle of this, research, conspiracies, flat Earth, if they think that, it's catching on, because we obviously have a very biased viewpoint, even though I do believe that it is catching on, whether it's by the millions or by the thousands or whatever. I can confidently say that people's curiosity is aroused. Just that very intuition that something is wrong. I've always felt that way, that something just never made any sense about this world that we live in. It's like if everything is about money and losing money over this, then why go to war and spend billions on war when it seems to me that you could take that same money and fix the problem, whatever. I mean, just stuff like that. It's never added up to me. And
it's becoming obvious to me now too that I forget when I say that the space station cost $150 billion. Like, man, but they didn't go to space and drop off a box of $150 billion. What they did was they put $150 billion into the economy. So when I start to think of things that way, I realize that everything that they've done was space. And think of all these astronomical societies and these observatories and these colleges and these high class royal societies, and everything that they're doing is propping up this economy just to basically make it make it go a little bit further. I mean, this economy should have crashed 50 years ago, but what they kept doing was they kept building fake businesses, Boeing, and then you have all the JPL. All these places are they're fake. I mean, do they build items? Yeah, but it's all meant so people have jobs, because if people really realized how little we need all the things that people are building, there would just be a surplus of money and a surplus of people and a surplus of things to do, and they don't want that. They need slaves, so they keep propping this up. The space station is 150. We need more things. We need to build more things to go to Mars. It's all just propped up, and it has to crash, and it should have crashed already. But I think what we're doing is good work to bring that about quicker.
Yeah. And I think that we absolutely have the technologies available to where we don't have to have this sort of debt slave situation going on. But unfortunately, nefarious people in the upper echelons of power they've sort of got a sweet thing going for them where they basically rake in all the money and the real estate and the real wealth, while they have basically debt slaves, hundreds of millions of them. But it is our choice. This is our generation, and it's our choice whether or not we want to continue down this sort of Federal Reserve, Rockefeller, Rothschildian path, or whether we want to actually do something different. And I think that flat Earth is a big, wide open gate to this sort of change. It just has to catch on, and I see it catching on a lot quicker than other things there's nothing similar to it, but I just see it catching on a lot more quickly than other sort of, I don't even like to use the word conspiracy theory, because how the hell can the truth be a conspiracy theory, but, whatever.
Exactly. Well, they want to make it a conspiracy theory. That's why they invented the term. Anybody that's talking the truth, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. It's like, well, okay. And I've said many times before, it's like the theory part of this is so far gone. It's way past a theory, and it's well into the realm of fact. And I think anybody that's even done the most cursory of examinations into conspiracy theories, quote unquote, knows that it's a derogatory term coined just for actual truth movement. And when that didn't work, then what they did is they came in and they have implemented a whole slew of other techniques to try and invalidate or discredit anybody speaking real truth. So yeah,
they need every aspect of it. They need everything to build up and prop up this system that they thrive in, right? I mean, everything about it is false, from global warming, you name it. All those things they just exist as a product of this system. So they can't let anybody know that, or else people will just say, why don't we just destroy the whole system? Well, because the rich wouldn't be rich anymore. So, I mean, that's the reason that everything is the way it is so that rich people get richer and the poor people get poorer. You kind of keep them at a certain place where they're always seeing what it's like, what life is like in the better world, but they never quite can get there. And that's how you kind of run society, and that's everything that they do is simply that. All of society's problems are caused by the system that keeps it going. I mean,
well, and the scariest thing about it, though, is our cash is literally sigil magic that has replaced people's faith in God and their neighbors in a piece of paper, which is very scary, and it sounds like a bizarre conspiracy theory. But if you actually,
slavery.
Yeah, but if you research it, our cash system is actually sigil magic, and it really is the only thing that gives it value is the people's faith. So, I mean, what better an analogy? I mean, if you have faith in money, then technically you worship it, right? I mean, in a broad, general sense.
Absolutely, and not only that. I mean, mankind went on for millennia using the trade system, the barter system. We don't need money, and people think that, oh my God, if the money system crashes and the U.S. dollar crashes, the whole world's going to go to hell. It's like, why? Why? It's just money. It means nothing. It has no actual use. I'm sorry, Jaron?
It's exactly what needs to happen.
Yeah, it's exactly what needs to happen. You're right, because do you think people, if the dollar crashes and all of this goes away, people are going to really believe that without that they can't survive, they can't grow gardens, they can't still depend on a barter system? It's absolute nonsense, but see, that's how deep this lie goes.
It will be a culling, though, because there's a lot of people, especially seniors, that are, depending on like the Social Security check and whatnot, and then of course you've got people on disability. And when this thing goes, yeah, it's going to be a culling, much like the Great Depression was. But I think it's going to be on a massive, worldwide scale, and they already have their preconceived solution in place for this.
The government solution, right?
Yeah, eventual bust.
But I would like to think that if and when the dollar crashes, that we would kind of return to our humanity and start taking care of our senior citizens, our elders, realizing the contribution that they themselves have also made into the society. In other words, it's going to take an entirely different paradigm shift.
Like completely, like 100%.
Completely different, yes. But And of course, it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I'm with you 100%, Jaron. This is what needs to happen, and that's the one reason why they haven't collapsed it, and they keep propping it up. And of course, they can do this indefinitely because they can create money indefinitely. But the second that they take away that power that money has and they make it worthless, then all of a sudden people are going to be fending for themselves, and they're going to start forming communities where they're actually working together, and they're going to realize that they don't need these stupid Federal Reserve notes that are printed on worthless pieces of paper that are worth really nothing more than kindling to start a fire.
And I was gonna go ahead.
You go.
I was just going to say real quick, since the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, the value of the dollar has dropped 95%. So well done, Federal Reserve, to prevent inflation. But go ahead, yeah.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say that from top to bottom, I mean, when you look at the Congress and the House of Representatives and the NSA, the FBI, the IRS, the police, governors, courts, all that exists in order to maintain the inequality, in order to maintain the structure which created it. I mean, that's
Absolutely.
It. Our world will suck until we face the reality of the entire deception. And I don't think people are ready to face that yet. I think people are scared of it. I mean, we can't keep producing things for the exchange of fake dollars. I mean, that's not the way a system will ever work, because you just have people charging the minimum they can to make their product and then charging a boatload and getting rich. Apple iPhones and things like that. That's just a mechanism for Apple to get filthy rich, and they don't care what they pay their employees. That's not the way a system needs to work. And so it's sad, because we have the whole system, that throwaway system too. What's better, to build a computer that lasts for 10 years or to build a computer that lasts for 2? When you're a company and you work in this capitalist system, it's better to build a computer that works for 2 years, then poops out, then somebody has to come back and buy another one. That's why it's a throwaway society, which is the entire environmental issue, that we don't build things that last, that are meant to save the earth. We don't care about garbage. We don't care about pollution. They just let all that stuff run rampant. And, you know,
That's right.
attempting to legislate like global warming is like trying to attack the problem with its cause. It'll never work in this system. You cannot fix it. And, I mean, do you jump in the pool to dry off? No. You know, it would make no sense. You would never do that. But that's what they're trying to do. And it just is sickening, because I don't know how people are going to wake up to it if they can't get little bits of it, or they want to argue about global warming. Oh, it is warming. Oh, it isn't warming. That's not the point. That's not the point at all. It doesn't matter if it is warming or isn't warming. We should take care of the earth, period. But it just, you can't. They're trying to solve global warming within the current system. Like, what are you talking about? I mean, there's nothing. You can never fix global warming in this system.
It'll
It just
never
needs to
happen.
be a whole new paradigm.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
Yep.
with the rate of deforestation of really the lungs of the earth, which is like the South American rainforest, you know, that to me, if there's any sort of cause of overabundance of carbon dioxide, you know, it's not just people breathing and cows farting. It's the fact that you've got these big corporations that are getting rid of the lungs of the earth. And
Yeah.
so, you know, we have to sort of at least try to maintain balance here. And it's just like these big corporations, which, by the way, a capitalist system depends on balance, it depends on honesty, and it depends on competition. And when you have monopolies, technically they're supposed to be illegal. But when you have monopolies, that gets rid of this honesty and competition. Just a quick anecdote, when I was young, I lived by the golf course, and me and my friends would buy a few 12-packs of Coca-Cola and Sprite, and we'd sit like in between the 15th and 16th holes where the golfers would have to cross our road, and sell them ice-cold Cokes for like 75 cents, and we'd sell them, like we'd swim into the lakes and find a bunch of really good golf balls and sell them to them for a deal. But you know, if we wanted to be greedy capitalists or good corporate citizens, then we should have been, you know, we could have been charging them double or triple what we charged them, but we were just honest, and, you know, we were just making a little bit of profit off of what we were doing. And, you know, that's sort of the idealistic form of capitalism, but it's gotten so far away from that to where we literally have corporate fascism, and, you know, it's got to go. It really does.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, we're caught in the system, and it needs to be abolished. And you know, understanding it is the first key, and that's pretty much all I have to say about that.
And stop voting.
Yeah, like it does any good anyway,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's just ridiculous that people don't even get that if 1% of the world has, or 1% of the country has the money, and we know that all the politicians are simply paid for, so what they do is they vote in the way that benefits the 1%. It's like, it's not even difficult to figure out what the hell's going on, and we wonder, well, why is this going on? Why do all these laws keep getting passed? Well, they're going to be laws that make the rich richer and make you poorer, and you've got the rich who are getting richer, you've got the poor getting poorer, and you've got the politicians who are maintaining a good life because they're getting paid off to pass the laws that benefit the rich. So what do you even expect them to do? They're not going to just say, no, I'm going to stand up for myself, and I'm just going to say, no, I'm not taking your money. Well, then guess what? They become poor. So it's not even hard to figure out. They're going to take the money. You would too. So
That's right. And the middle class goes away. I mean,
Yeah.
that's
the goal. Yep.
that's absolutely what's happening.
We get to choose between Donald Trump, who's obviously just an average Joe, and Hillary Clinton, who's just a regular gal from down the road, right? No,
Yeah.
and it's like all of our, you know, I call them selected cheap official for the last 100 years have been wealthy lawyers, which, you know, in the Constitution it actually prohibits attorneys or lawyers or whatever from being president or holding elected office. But of course, the slick lawyers wrote that out of the Constitution. And so, yeah, you've got all these super wealthy, I call them plutocrats, who are so out of touch with reality, and just the only thing that they're worried about is their own personal gain, and they're sold out, they're sellouts.
You should read the Declaration of Independence and look how it is exactly what's going on now. This is exactly what was happening in Britain, exactly why those guys came over here, exactly why they said, no, screw this. You know, this is not right. You're not listening to our problems. You're passing laws without, you know, consulting us, and it's just a joke. The entire system is a disaster. And when you read the Declaration of Independence, it's saying exactly what's going on. We as a people no longer want to be governed by people who don't care about us, who want to just benefit themselves. We should just be able to stand up and say, we're out of here.
Yep. And the nepotism, of course, is off the scale. You know, people will say, oh, yeah, you can go back and show anybody as being a relative. You know, when we mentioned the fact that all the presidents are related to each other to a certain degree, you know, as cousins and whatever. And I've gotten responses, oh, well, you can do that with pretty much anybody.
No.
But you can also say, well, okay, so we're about possibly going to have another Clinton in the White House. We have Bushes all over the place, 2 presidents, a governor, a head of a savings and loan that was completely. In other words, all these people, maybe if they're not only are they.
Don't forget the Kennedys.
Yeah, the Kennedys, absolutely. The Kennedys all over. So it is nepotism. It is all about keeping it in the family bloodline. And beyond that, if they're not directly in the family bloodline, then how many of the politicians are members of secret societies, Masons, Skull and Bones, whatever, all the way going back forever? Now that is something that you can't just make a little case and say, oh, anybody could be that. You know, these people that deny this are completely deluding themselves. Absolutely deluding themselves, and it amazes me that they will go to the lengths that they do, you know, to send me articles about, oh, well, yeah, you make the statement about the presidents all being related. Well, it's just nonsense, and it's not nonsense. You know, either they have directly the same last name, they're married to each other, they're brothers, they're cousins, or they're in the same fraternity.
Yeah.
This stuff is undeniable.
I was going to say, even all the bloodlines aside, just that one election that we had, Bush versus Kerry, was a huge conflict of interest because the two of them literally have bizarre blood oaths where they, each of them, and I'm not just saying this to be nasty, but each
Both
of them,
Skull and Bonesers, yes.
yeah, masturbated in a coffin and told their, you know, brothers, their societal brothers, their deepest, darkest secrets, and so they all start off into this Skull and Bones venture with dirt on each other, and that's one of the reasons why they sort of have to trust each other, because not only are they threatened with death, but guess what? If you know, betray us or if you fall out of line, then you're going to be, you know, we're going to show the tape with you and the dog or whatever, right? You know what I mean? And so it's just, it was a huge conflict of interest in that race. And the guy that hosted, what was it, Meet the Press, what was his name? He died shortly after the interviews. Forget the name. I'll think of it when I'm not thinking of it. But he interviewed both
Mike Wallace? Was it Mike Wallace?
Wallace rings a bell. Might have been, yeah.
Dan Rather, I don't know.
Nah,
but anyway,
but the guy that did Meet the Press, I can't remember his name. He was sort of a heavy-set dude. Anyway, he interviewed both Bush and Kerry and asked them about their time in Skull and Bones, and both of them basically answered, well, it's so secret I can't talk about it, and that was their answer, and they changed the subject. And then Tim Russert was his name. It wasn't long after those interviews that he just sort of mysteriously died of you know, possibly fast-acting cancer, like you see happening with people that you know, ask the wrong questions publicly.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we are kind of well over our 3 hours, so we should probably wrap this up. But yeah, great talk today, and we didn't get to everything like we always want to. One of these days, I really do want to take some calls on Skype, and you know, I have it queued up and ready to go every time, but we never seem to get to that. And we can also kind of finish our debunking of this person that will remain unnamed, at least for the time being. Of his 25 points at another time.
We never even got to that at all, did we?
Well, we did. We did on several layers. I was kind of fitting into the conversation that would address those points without specifically, you know, playing his video or anything like that. Because, like I said before, I think it's nonsense to even give these trolls the publicity, if you will. I don't see any value in it. It just starts a little pissant war that it's ridiculous. So we can talk about the subject matter, but we'll just leave the progenitors of the message out of it.
Do you want to go ahead? We're going to do that next week, and we'll answer those and take calls.
Yeah, let's do that next week, and whatever happens, and we'll kind of go from there.
I thought it was don't feed them after midnight and don't get them wet.
Yeah, exactly. So. Anyway, before we close out, John, do you have anything else you want to promo or talk about?
Red light.
Yeah, definitely. If you guys haven't seen the show I've been doing, I started out weekly, been doing it bi-weekly. It's Static Plain Truth on my second channel. It's archived as a playlist on my primary channel. I will be ending season 1 soon, so that when I kick off season 2, it'll be on my main channel. But just much love to all the live listeners out there. You guys are great. Peace to everybody out there in the chat. It was good hanging out with you. Thank you so much for having me on, Jaron and Bob. And anytime, man, just let me know. And as long as my schedule is clear, which it usually tends to be, just let me know ahead of time, and I'm happy to kick it with you guys. You guys are great. Love you.
All right, beautiful.
You too.
And
Appreciate you being on earlier today. That was awesome. So thank you for answering that call, and thanks for being on today. And we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, I'm on.
Yep, and yeah, in case you guys didn't know about it out there, Jaron and Morgile did kind of a hangout this morning, because I know Jaron was kind of excited about his new computer, which, if you've noticed, has performed flawlessly. It sounds
no
great,
sound
Jaron.
problems. Did you notice?
I have noticed that. Yep, excellent. So,
And that's
all
a
right,
big thank you to Bob, by the way. Bob built it for me from scratch, basically, parts and pieces and odds and ends, and it is awesome.
Yep. I did it on behalf. I mean, Jaron paid for it, but I did it with love on behalf of the community, because we just couldn't stand your garbled audio anymore. So it was awesome. All right, so I guess that's it for me, Jaron. You got anything before we close out?
Just reminding people to go to the petition if you haven't signed it yet. We need 100,000 signatures in 30 days, and we started out with 200 after 1 day, so that's on pace for 6,000. Not quite 100,000, but if you do want to challenge NASA to get out there and tell them that we need a 24-hour camera on the Earth, again, I'm telling you, they can't do it. It's impossible. They'll be found out in a day, and that's why I'm kind of pushing this, not because I want to see a 24-hour view of the Earth, because I know they can't do it. That's the difference. So you can go to j.mp/earthcam, and that'll take you right to the petition, and sign that, and that'd be appreciated. And that's about it. We'll talk to you guys soon.
All right, beautiful. And with that, we'll go ahead and sign out. I do want to give a last-minute thank you once again to our moderators in the chat, Chris Chuseeker, Gabna, Cami, DJ, Brap Allgood. Thank you for keeping the chat kind of a family-friendly place to go, and keeping the trolls out of it. It makes it a much nicer experience for everybody out there. So thank you to everybody for that. And with that, we'll get out of here, and we'll leave you with Jaron's immortal words once again. Be good to each other. Don't lie to each other. Open your mind. There's truth inside. Peace out, everybody.
Peace.